The newspaper hits the floorboards with a slap loud enough to jolt you from the kind of sleep that isn't rest so much as escape. Rent's due tomorrow. Read "Don't Make Me Come Looking for You." Your landlord booms through the thin door, and the echo feels like it travels all the way down your empty stomach. Seattle, 1897. The air through your sash window smells like low tide and coal smoke, and the wallpaper in your room curls off the lath like a tired tongue. You're Thomas Reed, 32, a carpenter with a good eye and calluses to prove it. Exactly the sort of man a city stops needing when banks collapse and work dries up. For years since '93, and the panic still nips at every heel on these streets. You've learned how far you can stretch a loaf when your hands shake. How often a proud man can walk by a hiring sign he knows is lying. You bend to the paper for the 5th time this week, ready to scan the want ads, and the headline hits you like a hammer blow. Ton of gold arrives steamship. Portland docks with riches from the Klondike. Not metaphor, a literal ton. Nuggets and dust hauled down from some remote crease in the Yukon you couldn't find on a map without squinting. The names: Blur Bonanza, El Dorado, Rabbit. Somebody crossed it out and wrote Bonanza again, but the numbers don't. $5,000 in a coffee tin, 100,000 in a burlap sack. Men stumbling down the gangplank under the weight of overnight fortunes. You reading that fairy story. A voice says from your doorway. Frank Porter, a barrel-shouldered iron worker who hasn't worked iron in months, fills the frame. You hand him the paper. He whistles slow. Says here they couldn't find enough backs to carry the gold off the ship. It's real, you say, and you don't quite recognize your own voice, like it's trying on hope again after a long time in storage. On the street below your window, Seattle is already molting into something new. Ships that should have been scrapped are getting tarred and patched. Outfitters are painting Klondike Special on every box of bacon and boots and beans. Men with bad teeth are selling maps to secret creeks. Men with worse teeth are selling advice for the price of a shot. You thinking of it. Frank says, with what money? You almost laugh. The Mounties up north, the paper says, aren't letting a soul over the border without a year of food and gear, nearly a ton of supplies per man. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, dried fruit, tools, clothes for winter that bites and doesn't let go. Rope, canvas, pans, picks. A sled if you can afford one. A back if you can't. Desperation does weird math, Frank mutters. Weird enough to send you 3 miles on sore feet to your sister's kitchen that afternoon. Margaret stands square at her sink, sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes like a judge. Her husband, Robert, steady, decent. The sort of man who oilstones his plain iron because that's what a craftsman does. Sits with his coffee and the same worried lines etched deep across his forehead. You want to go where? Margaret asks, like you've suggested, tunneling through the earth with a spoon. North, you say. Yukon Territory. The Klondike. With what money, Thomas? She asks again, but softer now. Borrow? Just a year. I'll pay you back tenfold. You lay the paper out like a lawyer. The ship, the gold, the names, the men, the sudden fortunes. I can build, you say. Up there they'll need cabins, boats, sluice boxes, bridges over mud that eats horses. And if the gold is half as real as this, you tap the headline. I'll bring back enough to float us all. Experienced miners, Robert says carefully. Outdoorsmen, trappers, not a joiner with a second-hand coat. People are dying up there, Margaret whispers. People are dying down here, you answer. And the room goes very still. The truth is that hope has a sound. It's the hush on a dock when a ship rounds the point with her decks lined. It's hammering and soaring at midnight in a city that hasn't had cause for hurry in years. It's the click of an abacus in your head as you tally what you own, not much against what you'll need, everything. You lay it out anyway, because debt is lighter than regret. $600 for passage and basic gear if you buy smart and trust luck. They argue they are family. They must, but the tide is already running. By week's end, you and Frank are shoulder to shoulder in Schwabarkers, and a man who looks like winter carved him whittles away your illusions with a few missing fingers. Shovels are for the photograph, he says, tapping the tool you're holding. Ground's frozen hard as a judge 9 months of the year. You thaw with fire. Burn a hole through the permafrost. Scoop the soup. Burn again. Takes a week to go down a few yards, if you're unlucky. What do you bring then? Frank asks. Boots, the man says. Good ones. Feet go first. Then rope, a back brace, and the sense to turn around when the mountain wants you. He calls himself Harris. He's been up 3 times. He's not rich, which is an education. He's alive, which is another. Seattle's main street fattens on Klondike fever. Tailors stitch fur linings into city coats. Blacksmiths turn out sled shoes and stoves. You buy flour by the barrel, bacon by the slab, coffee by the sack. You spend too much on boots because you believe Harris, and because losing toes is the kind of math you understand. You buy pitch and oakum, without knowing yet what you'll seal, just that every boat leaks and you'll have to build yours with your own hands. At night, the bars are a boiling stew of rumors and certainty, usually served together. Skagway is faster, somebody says. Daijar is safer, somebody else says, until a third man cackles and tells you both routes go to the same wall of ice. Chilcoot if you favor near vertical with your sorrow. White Pass if you like mud and dead horses underfoot. The Canadian Mounties will weigh your outfit at the summit and turn you back if you come up light. The river beyond is a series of glass-cold lakes strung like beads. Then the Yukon proper miles, and miles of current and teeth called White Horse Rapids and Five Finger. What do you say? Frank asks as the barkeep dings a bell and the band scrapes into after the ball. His eyes are bright. He looks like a man lined up for a brawl and grinning about it. I say we go, you answer, surprising yourself with how steady it sounds. 2 mornings later, the SS Queen blows her long, mournful whistle, and your stomach does a nervous little roll before the ocean even gets a hand on you. The docks boil with goodbye wives and mothers, sisters and girls with brave faces. Men who can't stop looking back, and in the middle of it, a kid not old enough to shave. Eyes wet, waving at a woman on the pier. She your wife? You ask. My mother, he says. His name is Billy. He's 19 and has never slept outdoors. The Queen is smaller than you want and louder than you expect. Men pack into berths like cargo, boots and socks steaming by the stove, bacon fat and coal smoke fighting for your sinuses. The sea is a mean host. It lifts you, drops you, finds whatever in you is loose and rattles it. You learn that hardtack is a dare more than a food. You learn that Harris walks decks like a man in his own kitchen, and that he swallows his whiskey like medicine and his opinions like gospel. Don't die on the boat, too embarrassing. Don't brag on the dock, too tempting for thieves. Don't forget that the real test isn't panning Colerits, living long enough to spend it. 10 days north, and the world turns mythic. Mountains shoulder straight up from black water. Glaciers hang in blue slabs, calving thunder that you feel in your ribs. The Queen threads the Lynn Canal like a needle, and then, around a point, you see it, a huddle of tents and rawwood shacks, and the sort of pier that looks offended by the idea of weight. Yeah, everything after the ocean will start here, but big ships can't kiss this shore. So you climb down into flat-bottomed lighters with your heart in your mouth and your gear in the hold and a small prayer in your chest for the men who will handle both. The beach is chaos. Men bargaining in 10 accents, dogs yowling, prices rising as fast as the tide. You negotiate, you get fleeced, you learn. Before sunset you've paid too much to see your barrels heaved onto mud that has ambitions of becoming a sea someday. And you understand that the fever taking this coast has a local name, opportunity, that night, under canvas that smells like every other man's breath and wet wool. You make 2 small vows, to keep a journal so your sister has something to hold if you don't come back, and to make your hands useful to someone every day so you don't turn into a man who only takes. The first step is simple and the second is hard, and both feel like anchors in a world about to start moving very fast. At dawn, Harris stands at the edge of camp and points into a valley that narrows to a throat of white. Sheep camp up there, he says. Then the scales, then the golden stairs. After that, the border. The what? Billy asks. Canada's up there, Harris says, grinning. So are the maps. They'll weigh your outfit and, if you're short, make you climb back down for more. Consider it their way of keeping full ghosts off their winter rolls. You shoulder your first load 80 pounds by the tally, 100 by the feeland, set your boots to the trail. Mud takes your ankles. Roots take your attention. Pride takes nothing. It's not invited. Men pass you both ways, groaning, silent, praying out loud. Somewhere ahead is a pass they named for gold with their tongues in their cheeks. Somewhere beyond that is a river and a city rumor calls Dawson, crowded with men who either got rich or got good at pretending. You go because you can't not. You go because the worst thing in Seattle was standing still. And because you're starting to suspect the Klondike doesn't so much promise gold as the chance to find out which part of you is brass and which shines. When the light hits true, cliffhanger beat. First glimpse of the black line cutting up the mountainside men like ants. A staircase hacked straight into ice. Tomorrow you climb, the first miles trick you. The Tyre River runs beside the trail like a helpful friend, and the mud, while greedy, is at least honest. A man can convince himself he's strong when the land allows it. Canyon City burns that illusion out of you. The path tilts, narrows, threads through trees that claw at your pack. Roots make ropes to trip you. Boulders lurk like debts you forgot about. On your back, flour, beans, bacon, coffee a year compressed into canvas and twine that soars at your shoulders with every step. By the time Finnegan's Point opens like a sigh 6 miles in, your hands are numb from straps and your pride's learned to be quiet. You drop the load, pant steam, feel your heart kick hard against your ribs. And you understand what Harris meant when he said the pass is crossed by stages. You won't climb this mountain once. You'll climb at 30, ferrying your future up in wet wool shuttles. Billy heaves in last, green as the moss and twice as shaky. Don't die on day 1, Harris says, and offers him coffee out of a blackened tin. It tastes like burned hope and keeps you standing. Frank looks too pleased with himself to admit the load bit him as hard as it bit you. Men become efficient out here, or they go home. You watch a pair rig a pulley on a stump to hand each other packs without wrenching shoulders. You watch another man tape his ankles with strips of canvas. You learn fast. The trail charges tuition in blood and beans. Back down empty to Dija, then up with the second load. A team of horses panics, bolts, drags a half-secured wagon through a pile of crates. The sound of flour hitting summer mud is small but obscene. You curse without even choosing the words. Secure your cash, Harris says. Rule 1, you count. Losses 20 pounds of white reduced to paste, and start the math of having to replace what you can't afford at prices that make Seattle feel like charity. Days bleed together into a rhythm that hurts less only because your mind decides it must. Canyon City comes next log. Bridges over water that would make your bones ache even in August. A plank walkway bolted to rock where the trail forgets to be wide. You share the path with men and dogs and the occasional packer whose price per pound rises with the grade. Somewhere along that stretch, a man sits with his boot off, foot swollen like a ham, and says, "I heard it snap." There's no doctor except the one who tells him the distance back to the beach. You take off your hat as you pass a shape near the trail with frost rimmed in his beard even in summer. You don't stop long. That's the part you won't talk about later. Sheep Camp is a city of canvas under an alpine wall. Out by the last stunted trees, the mountain finally shows you its teeth. A black zigzag climbs a white face, and the dots that move along it are men bent double under their lives. Someone laughs and it sounds wrong. Someone says a prayer that sounds better. Harris points at the notch in the skyline. That cut is the border, he says, and the Mounties don't come up light. Storms barrel out of nowhere. Hard sideways rain that turns to slant snow, a wind that shreds canvas and nerve. For 3 days the pass vanishes in cloud, and men who thought patience was a luxury discover it's a requirement. Rumors arrive between squalls. The stairs are closed, the stairs are open. An avalanche took 30, 60, more. Harris calls it trail talk and says the avalanche part is always true somewhere. Then, a morning comes clean and sharp as a new chisel. The pass is there, sudden and immense, and the black line of climbers is already moving. You pull your boots tight until the leather begs for mercy, shrugged into your load, and join the human rope. The scales is a flat place with a gallows humor name. Men weigh loads here, argue over ounces, trade a sack of beans for a pound of sugar because someone's back can't take both. The stairs beyond are not, strictly speaking, stairs. They are steps hacked into a slope that a sober man would avoid even without a pack. A guide rope snakes up like the world's meanest handrail. The angle seems to violate something mathematical. You step, and the mountain steps back. Your boot skates on ice polished by 1,000 panicked souls. Your hand closes on the rope. Your shoulder yelps. Behind you, Frank grunts. Above you, a man mutters numbers. 50, 51, 52. He'll swear later counting saved him. Below you, someone coughs, and the line shudders like a living thing. One step, Harris says, then another. Don't get fancy. The stairs funnel everything into single file. No passing, no resting. You climb because the men behind you will climb, and because down is a choice that goes through every man watching you. Your world narrows to the patch of ice under your toe and the heel of the man above you. Minutes expand into arguments. Time, like the air, thins. Halfway up the line stalls. Word rides down on ragged breath. A dropped pack has corked the pipe above. Somewhere, a shouted prayer ricochets across the slope. Billy is out of sight around a bend. You imagine him counting like the fellow above you, or talking to his mother, or just repeating in his head that he will not die on a frozen ladder to a country that wants proof of groceries. Your hands stop hurting. They go somewhere colder than pain. Your beard grows a crust of your own breathing. Men fall here without falling off. They fold just enough to make space where strength used to be, and then the rope and strangers and hate drag them up one step at a time. You think of the banks that failed back in '93, of men falling in slow motion in suits and hats. And you hate those rooms with their dark wood, and you love this rope with its raw fibers and patches of someone else's frozen blood. Someone's heart gives out a sound not unlike a dropped anvil, followed by a ragged tearing in the liner's hands. Pass a body down like a tender, terrible parcel. His face goes by blue and astonished. 60, someone says, because numbers are how you tell yourself stories you can stand to hear. The notch is closer than it has any right to be. You can see men at the rim now, see them vanish over and into Canada and whatever beyond. Eyes up, Harris says behind your left shoulder, and for a second you believe the sky is closer to your face than your feet. You haul, your knees threaten mutiny. And then the next step up is a snow shelf, and the next step after that is none at all. The top is a small, flat grace. Blue sky cut like glass, noise damped like church. Men sprawled like saints and sinners after the same hard ritual. You fall to your knees and then all the way back, heart slamming, lungs trying to relearn what air is for. Frank appears and doesn't gloat. That seems worth noting. Harris grins without teeth. A long line at the far side moves with a different rhythm, orderly, bureaucratic. Red coats bright as berries in the snow. Asterisk, welcome to Canada. A Mountie says when it's your turn, deadpan, in a way that makes you like him. He takes your name, your party count. Here's your estimate of the weight you intend to haul over in total, and gives each of you a stamped metal tag. Show this on every crossing, he says. When all your outfit is cached on the Canadian side, we'll certify. No exceptions. You weigh everybody up here. Frank asks, incredulous. The Mountie shrugs a little. Better here than burying them later. On the far slope, the world tips down, the kind of down you trust. The line loosens. The path is still mean, but it isn't vertical. Beyond snowfields, a tree line gathers, dark and inviting. Crater Lake, Harris says, 3 miles. Lake Lindeman after that. Lake Bennett after that. The words sound like rest but aren't. What they are, you'll learn. Is transition a series of lakes that will carry you to the Yukon if you can build something that floats and aim it through water that tries to kill you? Asterisk. The descent taxes different muscle groups and different nerves. Knees complain. Ankles wobble. Your pack wants to shove you faster than your feet can negotiate. Men going the other way down to sheep camp to fetch the next load are hollow-eyed and moving like ghosts. You understand for the first time that you will cross here not once, but a dozen times, reducing yourself to a shuttle between necessity and hope. Crater Lake is ringed with tents and the beginnings of cabins. It smells like wet spruce and pitch and ambition. You make a small camp, stash your load, and spend 20 seconds pretending you could just keep walking away from the mountain and the life it forced over your shoulders. Then you turn around and go back up. The line, the rope, the counting, you do it again. Because this is the price of being a person who chose to try on. Your 6th crossing, you see a place where the slope has been torn open. Snow and bodies and broken thoughts in a swath. The men in the line go quiet as they pass. There's always a reason you don't talk about a place on the trail. This one is easy to understand without words. By the 9th crossing, your tag rings on your pack with a triumphant little jingle. The Mountie reads it, nods, scribbles something in a tally book worn thin with other men's names, and hands you the certificate that says, in effect, you're legal to gamble your life further into the interior. It feels heavier than paper should. Lindman lies long and narrow between hills that squeeze the wind into whispers and yells. You pass a steam sawmill charging robbery rates to cut planks for men who didn't bring patience. Harris looks at you, one eyebrow up. You shake your head. We'll dig a saw pit, you say, patting the handle of a 2-man saw like a friend. It's the first time out here you'll trade the thing that fed you before hunger. Feels like a weapon instead of a memory. Bennett is the prize for those who didn't quit. An entire forest is falling into the shape of boats' flat-bottomed scows. Sharp-nosed skiffs, contraptions that look like prayers wrapped in pitch. Thousands of men hammer and argue and trade. The shore is a din of mallets, the air resin sweet and smooth. You pick a patch of ground near decent timber and draw a rectangle with your boot for the boat you don't know how to build but must. That night, the wind flaps canvas with warning. A squall slams down out of nowhere, rain that turns dirt into attempted lakes. Gusts that flatten tents and shove half-finished boats toward the water. You and Frank and Harris and Billy run with ropes and stakes and curses, hauling your stack of planks to higher ground, throwing extra lines across ribs that are starting to think they're fish. Men scream names lost in the uproar, wives from far cities, saints from near prayers, the kind of names men discover when the sky leans down to see what they're made of. In the morning, the beach is different. The storm kept what it wanted and left the rest. You count losses, share coffee with a neighbor who lost more, and start again. You dig the saw pit. You fall trees. You learn to read grain for planks that won't twist into jokes. You pack oakum, smear pitch, swear softly when you find a seam that didn't take, and swear louder when a knot splits under the adze. You build because the river is waiting, and because the only thing uglier than your boat will be failure. One night, the Mounties send a rider with a rumor that tastes like truth. Bonanza and El Dorado are staked to bedrock. Men in town talk like millionaires and sleep like babies. But there are new creeks dominion, sulfur where the ground might still be generous. And you file this where practical hope lives. Good carpenters are earning $15 a day in Dawson because rich men are discovering that gold needs walls to show it off. You name your scow Margaret, after the sister who pressed extra socks into your kit even as she called you a fool and wrapped you tight at the door. When she slides into Bennett and hangs between floating and choosing, you hold your breath, count to 3, and then grin like a man whose hands built a thing the world agrees to hold. White Horse Rapids mutters to you long before you see its teeth. Men on the beach nearby sell their services as pilots, and their fees sound cheap compared to a funeral. Harris wants to scout. You do, and you watch 2 boats run, one clean, one cracked down the middle like a lie. You pull your dust and hire a man with a fox's eyes and hands the size of plates. He says bail to Billy, pull to you and Frank. And don't think to everyone when the Margaret drops into the first chute. The river comes aboard like an uninvited cousin, loud, cold, insistent. The boat bucks, finds your knee, shoves you toward a rock you will remember in your ankle for years. The pilot yells a direction that isn't left or right so much as now, and you haul until your shoulder burns. The scow writes, drops, climbs, curses, physics, and then the roar moves behind you like a story you survived by not arguing with. You pay the pilot with shaking hands. After that 5-finger, rapids is a threading the needle trick that leaves only a couple of fresh leaks and the sense that your saw work was just honest enough. The Yukon widens. The current, for a blessed while, is a friend. You see moose in the shallows, bears that glance at you like kings, bald eagles overhead like flags reminding you whose country this is. You sleep on sandbars and wake with frost on your blankets and ache everywhere that proves you're alive. The miles slip like a long exhale, and then your friend stops breathing, right? Frank's cough turns from annoying to worried, from smoke-rattled to blood-tanged. Dawson rises out of the river bend in smoke and lumber and frantic activity. And your first stop isn't the recording office, it's the red-crossed tent where a doctor listens to Frank's lungs and says the word pneumonia like a sentence and a plan. Warm, dry, rested, he says, or you'll be burying him before the freeze. You didn't come north to build furniture for other men's parlor rooms. You came for gold, but when you see Dawson up close, prices faces, buildings rising with more money than sense, you understand the other currency. Skill, steady hands, work that doesn't depend on who hit a pay streak. You set your jaw and make a choice. First, save your friend. Then, if this town still has room for your kind of luck, you'll find it. A newspaperman says the richest claims are Ganand. A loaded word cracks the air like a whip. Work. Carpenters at $15 a day. Is that the road to the fortune you promised your sister, or the detour that keeps you in the north forever? Asterisk Dawson looks like a city a child would build if you gave him a pile of lumber and told him the ground would freeze in 6 weeks. False fronts stand shoulder to shoulder along Front Street, bragging about what they'll be when the plaster arrives. Smokestacks stab the sky. Dogs sluice between boots in tight packs like schools of fish. And everywhere, the sound of hammers. It would be comforting if it weren't all happening on mud that behaves like memory foam for lost boots. First order of business is saving Frank. Dr. Wilson's tent is warm in the way of frontier hospitals' heat from a small iron stove. A harsh carbolic tang that says the knife is clean even if the hands are not. The doctor listens to Frank's chest and pronounces a winter's worth of rest. Warmth and liquids, like he's writing a prescription for a different climate. You pay in dust, shaking a measured glitter into his brass scale while the doctor squints to make sure your grief doesn't short his fee. Get him out of canvas, Wilson says. Find walls. He glances at Frank, who's pretending to be upright. And until he can walk to the end of the street without coughing up a lung, he's not staking anything but a pillow. Walls in Dawson cost the kind of money that makes a man miss Seattle's landlords. The hotels have rooms if you like, your sleep priced by the heartbeat. Bunks in longhouses go hot track. One man's mattress becomes the next man's minute you stand up. You're weighing the humiliations when a woman with a posture like a yardstick appears at your elbow and reads your whole situation in a blink. I'm Mrs. Wilkes, she says. Boarding house, 2nd Street. I've got a room with 2 beds, a stove, and rules. 10 a night if you don't argue. She studies Frank. He gets broth and a chair by the fire. You get the lecture. You take it before she can change her mind. The room is a marvel. Vertical walls, a real window, a stove with a draft that behaves. The rules are simple. No spitting, no knives on Sundays, no women unless they're me. And keep your boots by the door or I'll throw them out myself. In return, you get heat. You get a door that latches. And this matters more than you expected. You get the sense that someone cares whether you wake up in the morning. Now you need money the way a fire needs air. Harris says the mine's higher underground at 15 a day, and the look in his eye says he still believes that's where the true story is written. You head the other way to the yards, where fresh logs and rough lumber pile like promise. Sorensen's yard smells like pitch and sawdust and opportunity. He's big across the shoulders, with a beard that looks like it grew in self-defense. You can build, he says, watching how your hands touch a board, testing whether you know would buy weight and warp. Houses in Seattle, you answer. Stairs that don't creak and doors that do when they should. He grunts. I pay 15 two men who can hold a nail and 22 men who can hold a crew. You offer, start me at 15. I'll earn the 20 before the stove goes cold tonight. Asterisk, asterisk. By noon, you're foreman at a half-raised saloon hotel on King Streeter. 2-story box that wants to be respectable when the wallpaper arrives. Your team is for men and the promise of 2 more, all of them strong enough, none of them trained. You teach them the rhythm that keeps fingers intact. Slow is steady, steady is fast. You show them how to scribe to permafrost, logic no, deep foundations that thaw out from under you come spring. Rock pads, sledge runner, sills, pilings as patient as monks. You talk them through a frame that allows for a town that moves walls, that forgive, roofs that shift without punishing anyone below. By sundown, a second-floor ledger is seated tight, square to a world that ISN single quotes. Sorensen pays you in a ritual, dust poured from horn to pan, the pointer needle twitching, his eye flicking from meniscus to mirror. You walk back to 2nd Street with a leather poke in your pocket and a fear in your gut you didn't expect. Fear of liking this too much. Frank's fever breaks slow, the way ice parts in a river bend, a little more flow each day, a faint sound of something coming back to life. Billy finds work at the assay office because he can count faster than most men can lie. And that's a talent towns will pay for. He spends hours weighing other men's miracles, writing numbers with care, trying not to stare at the ones who set a pouch on the counter with hands that shake and call it luck. Harris tends bar at the Northern Saloon on a wage that depends on how much a man loves the sound of his own story. He says it's temporary, and you nod because it has to be. Dawson reveals its economy in a week. Eggs cost $1 and taste like the memory of a farm. Potatoes go for 10 a pound because scurvy charges compound interest and nobody wants to pay that bill. A decent winter coat is 100 if you like your skin. Stoves, shovels, nails all priced by distance to the nearest ocean and the number of months until the river moves again. Men carry their wealth in little skin purses and buy the world by the grain. You watch a fellow pour dust for a meal and think how the North forces you to measure everything, even hunger, by the end of your 2nd week. Sorensen bumps you to 18 because the roof went tight despite the wind and because you settled a fistfight between 2 laborers by forcing them to trade hammers for 10 minutes. You're a carpenter and a constable, he says. Go on and make me rich. You don't see it coming until it's sitting at your table. Harris, late one night, eyes bright in a way you've learned to fear. Hunker Creek, he says, like it's a prayer. Fellow named Peterson, selling half a claim, says it's averaging 20 to 30 a day and needs capital for equipment before the cold sets in. We buy in for 800, 200 each and we're in the money by Christmas. A claim that good raises every hair on your neck. Why sell? You ask, letting the ugly possibility walk into the room and sit down. Harris shrugs, offended. Because a shaft costs timber. Because a windlass costs iron. Because smart men sell halves of good. Things to make whole fortunes. His hand shakes when he drinks. Billy's eyes go wide, the way a clerk's will at the prospect of being promoted to owner. Frank coughs and looks tired. We just paid our room for 2 weeks, he says. And winter's a mouth that goes on eating. Still, you go look. This is how decent men go broke. They do their diligence first. Hunker is a ribbon through spruce and rumor. Peterson meets you with a dog team and the self-confidence of a man who's told a story so often he believes he wrote it. The claim is tidy. The shaft is timber-but enough to make you think somebody cared once. In the cabin, he pours nuggets on a table fat as peas, smooth as forgiveness. Last week's take, he says, casual as coffee. With the right setup, we'll triple. He shows you the drift. The air down there is the kind that makes your lungs remember they're mortal. A small stove burns to keep the frost from welding the world around you shut. The thorn scrape method is slow work, but it's honest, and that's its own kind of seduction. You can see how a man would believe. You can see how a man could be made too. On the way back to town, you ask the questions a carpenter asks. How straight are the sets? How wide the vein? How many hands are in the circle, and where do they sleep? Harris asks minus questions. How often does the color fall off? What happens when you hit a clay lens? Who recorded the claim, and who disputes it? Billy asks a clerk's question. What are the books? Dawson answers you with a grin that's seen this before. At the Monte Carlo, a man with shoulders like a root cellar says, Peterson's good at finding partners for claims that do their best work right before the ink dries. At the recorder's office, the clerk's eyebrows go up half a notch when he hears the name and then flatten. Because a clerk is a professional eyebrow. In a back booth at the Northern, a working miner says Hunker's honest ground but mostly picked. And anyone promising 30 a day regular is either cheating or sampling from another man's sluice. You bring all that back to the boarding house and set it between you like the last loaf. Harris is insulted on behalf of the North. This town will talk a man out of a sunrise, he says. We came here to mine. Were we expecting the ground to get down on its knees and offer up the gold with a spoon? His voice wavers just enough to show the crack. We buy in now, we get ahead of winter. Or we buy a hole in the ground that eats our last dollar, Frank says, not unkind. I've seen that hole. It has my name on it from another life. Billy wants to believe in arithmetic. Invest X, receive 3X, proceed to happiness. He wants it because the alternative is the Dawson math he's watched for weeks. X minus winter is always less than you think. You go to work the next morning and drive a brace into a sill plate and try to compute what your father would tell you to do. Then, because the North does not like indecision, it answers for you. Harris is gone before supper. He leaves a note in block letters, don't wait. Made the deal. There's a dent in the bunk where his bag was. There's a cold in the room that isn't from the window, that night. Mrs. Wilkes doesn't say, "I told you so." She sets a thicker blanket on Frank's bed and an extra bowl on the table. "Men go out here," she says softly, meaning into the hills, into the winter, into themselves. Some come back. Dawson's true winter arrives like a bell being struck. One morning the air is so cold it squeaks when you step through it. Breath freezes in your beard and makes you look like a saint of bad decisions. The river goes from highway to wall in a week. Men start using the word until in a new way. Until spring, until the thaw. Until we see what we are. Work flips inside like a mitten turned right. Exterior framing becomes interior finish. You build doors that fit the way apologies should. You lay floors with room to swell and shrink without complaint. Sorensen raises you to 20 because your joints stay tight at 30 below, and because you can teach a greenhorn to cope a corner the way a winter teaches a man to be careful. You pay Mrs. Wilkes in dust and gratitude. You learn a new craft, sleeping through hammers in your dreams. One night a paperman tells you, Bonanza and El Dorado are locked down tight and Dominion's the new rumor. Another night a freighter says, the price of flour will double before January. On a third night, a Mountie mentions a list he keeps of those who forgot to bring citrus and vitamins and hope. You write your sister about the work, the cold, and the way the sky looks when it remembers stars. You don't write about Harris. Not yet Christmas comes and brings mail the way a miracle should suddenly. Loudly, carried by a man who looks like he wrestled the Arctic and won on points. Margaret's letter smells like a kitchen and a life with chairs that match. She tells you Seattle is softening around the edges again, that Robert is hiring, that the children pray for Uncle Thomas and his foolish bravery. At the bottom, in a neat hand, she writes that father is gone. You fold the paper like a carpenter folds a plan he can't change. You sit by the stove and listen to the wood talk in the heat, and you learn something about grief at 50 below. It burns slow, like green spruce, and it smokes into everything, the day after Christmas. Harris reappears at your door, wrapped in frost and something that looks like shame. Peterson salted the samples. The little pouch on the table was somebody else's week. The hunker ground gives up $5 a day on its best behavior. The cabin he sleeps in with the Swedes remembers every gap in a log like an insult. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He asks for work. Sorensen finds him a spot swinging a hammer because winter has a way of burning up pride and because you put your own name on the ask. Dawson forgets nothing but forgives more than you'd think. Maybe it's because the graveyard can't keep up, and just like that, the North teaches its meanest, most useful lesson. The thing worth more than gold dust in a town like this is usefulness. Men who can be counted on. Men who show up. Men who turn lumber into shelter and mistakes into lessons. The claim might not pay, but work does paid in dust and relief, and the clean ache of muscles used for the right reasons. Then, at 40 below, the Monte Carlo catches fire. Water freezes in the buckets before it hits flame, and the wind decides to see if your city can stand up to being tested by two elements at once. You drop your tools and run toward the glow. The night is about to get loud. Asterisk. Fire declares itself in the north the way a grizzly does, without introduction, without apology. At 40 below, heat looks impossible, which is why it's so dangerous. One spark in a kitchen stove at the Monte Carlo turns into a line of orange teeth, biting up the saloon's false front. And suddenly half the town is sprinting down Front Street with boots that squeak from the cold and buckets that slosh like they resent the job, You run with the rest. Collar up against a wind that tries to make a meal of your cheeks. The sky is a black dome studded with indifferent stars. Beneath it, the Monte Carlo is a lantern, windows blowing out one by one with glassy screams. A stairway of flame racing upstairs, as if the dance had merely changed tempos. By the river, men work a saw through ice as thick as a door, hauling slush aside with a rhythm born from panic and practice. The first buckets steam, the second buckets freeze fingers. The third freeze solid before they hit the wall of flame and shatter like thrown plates. The world is full of bad jokes tonight. Clear that drift. Johnny Lind roars over the roar, pointing where snow has piled like a barricade against the next building. We need a break, the fire can't jump. You and 20 others swing axes like you're cutting debt out of your chest. The snow fights back light at the surface, ice at the bottom, packed by wind and boot. A bucket brigade forms, gloved hands, passing hope down the line. The water eats through the heat in a hiss that sounds like relief and mockery at once. The flames climb anyway, licking eaves, tasting the next block. At the river hole, the pump stutters and men swear in 2 languages. Someone plunges bare hands into the water to free the intake and comes up screaming. Skin glued to iron, a Mountie wraps his hands in a blanket and peels him away gentle as a midwife. The fire throws off sparks, and those sparks drift like doomed fireflies onto roofs. So boys scramble up with wet sacks and courage, stamping out each orange star as if the sky is dropping a story they refuse to read. You lose track of time minutes, hours until the Monte Carlo sags inward and lets go with a sigh. Flames settle to a churning red and the smoke changes color, less hungry, more tired. The wet line you carved in the snow between saloon and rowhouse holds. A cheer goes up. Ragged but realer sound men make when they realize they might get to wake up tomorrow next to their tools, dot by grey dawn. The Monte Carlo is a black rib cage stuffed with steam. Frost limbs every beard in the bucket line. Men look like saints carved from ice and smoke. You head back up 2nd Street with a gait that says your legs resent your choices. In the boarding house kitchen, Mrs. Wilkes meets you with a mug that smokes peppermint and something medicinal. "Don't put those boots anywhere near the stove," she says, "unless you like souls, like potato chips." She hands you a bowl of stew that tastes like mousse, barley, and competence. "And sit," she adds, in the tone of a woman who could command an army. On your way to bed, you check Frank, who's propped on pillows and pretending not to ache. He's crossed the invisible border from sick to healing. His cough sounds less like it wants to take him with it. He nods at your burned eyebrows and smiles without humor. "You smell like a campfire and an argument," he says. "You sleep like you didn't know how until now." When you wake, the light creeping around the curtains is weak and blue. Outside, Dawson gets on with the work of not dying. Men pick through the Monte Carlo's bones for anything not turned to cinders. A sign goes up around noon on the next lot over. "New Monte Carlo coming spring." That's Dawson, the optimism of a drunk, the memory of a banker, the spine of a mule. The weeks after the fire take a shape you'll remember for the rest of your life. Work, eat, thaw, sleep, endure. The temperature drops another notch, like the Lord decided to see what else you can take. 60 below is a number, but also a fact in your bones. Spit crackles before it hits the ground. Coffee cools to slush on the walk from the stove to the table. Brass bites fingers through wool. You learn to test an axe head with the back of your knuckle, because steel steals flesh at these numbers. Your carpentering goes indoors by necessity. Dawson's winter economy is a symphony in D minor. Door fitting, window trimming, stair runs that won't murder a man on the third step. You mill tongue and groove that will hold mostly tight until the June heat tries to turn a house into a shrug. You hang doors with that extra whisper of space winter demands. Drive screws through pilot holes because splitting is what wood does in this cold if you give it the chance. Sorensen rotates crews to keep men warm in motion. You build a rhythm with your team. A call and response of measurement and cut that drowns out the part of your brain counting days until the sun remembers how to climb. Outside the shop, winter raids the weak points. Scurvy visits camps where men thought dried apples were a luxury and vegetables were gossip. Fingers come back white from a walk to the privy and never fully forgive you. Cabin fever is the silent epidemic, men staring into flames as if staring into a mirror they don't like. Men forgetting, men remembering too much. The Mounties call it Arctic hysteria in their neat ledger. You call it the dark finding tender places. Billy Fraze. He goes about his work at the assay office with clerical care, weighing other men's luck and logging it. But at night he shrinks as if the day used up the part of him that knows how to be a person. He sleeps too long, then not at all. He moves through rooms like a man underwater. He would never admit to needing anything, but once you catch him at the window, staring past the frost into a sky full of ribboned green light, the aurora-like silk torn slow-and, his face is the face of someone trying to remember what joy felt like in another lifetime. Take a day. You tell him, walk up to the ridge, let the light do its trick. I'm fine, he says, which is what men say when the last door left unlocked in them is closing. January hammers, February sulks. The nights ease by minutes and still feel endless. Some mornings Dawson wakes to new tragedies. A man found frozen in a drift because whiskey told him he was warmer than he was. A pair of partners who forgot that the same room for too many nights is a cage. A dog team shot in anger that wasn't really about the dogs. You and Frank and Harris build a pact of breakfast, check-in. Supper small anchors tied to big days. One night, after a long shift finishing cabinetry in the study of a bonanza king with hands like shovels and a laugh like a shovel too, you and Harris head to the opera house dance because a fiddle can sometimes drown a blizzard. The hall is a miracle of heat and light. Coal oil lamps throw gold on faces that haven't seen a summer sun in months. Women in bright dresses, some dance hall girls, some wives, some miracle entrepreneurs like Mrs. Wilkespin, with men who have been moving lumber and ore for half a year and need to move something else. For a couple of hours, winter waits outside like an unwelcome guest who can't find the doorknob. Billy doesn't come. He's sleeping, Frank says. You let it be, because telling a man how to carry his dart is like telling him how to carry his pack. He'll do it, or he won't. And either way, he'll resent your hands on the straps. 2 nights later, the town wakes to a different kind of alarm, not the red pulse of fire, but the hollow absence of a familiar pair of boots under a familiar bunk. Billy is gone. His parka, too. His mittens, not his best pair. The temperature without the wind is 45 below. With the wind, it's the kind of number a thermometer shrugs at. You and Harris split the grid you draw in your head. Waterfront to Monte Carlo, ruins to the back lots. Frank takes the freight yard and the assay office, in case Billy's melancholy took him to his last known duty. The snow underfoot is a map of tracks that lie, men and dogs and sleds and the busy syntax of a frontier all overlay one another. You stop listening to your feet and start listening to your gut and your memory of the boy who was a man but not yet hardened enough to know it. Harris finds him at noon in a shed behind Northern Commercial, where they store crates that smell like apples long gone. The roof sags but holds a skin of snow. Inside, the wind is a suggestion rather than a sentence. Billy is hunched in the corner like a coat that fell off a peg breath, shallow, eyes open, pupils the size of grief. His cheeks are too pale. He's past shivering, which is worse than shivering. "Hey kid," Harris says, "because you talk soft to boys and horses on the edge. Let's go home." Billy doesn't answer, but his eyes follow when Harris shrugs out of his parka and wraps it around him. You hook your hands under his armpits and feel how light he is. The North steals weight when you aren't looking. You half carry, half drag him back to 2nd Street, where Mrs. Wilkes is waiting like she knew the moment he stepped through the door of that shed. Her hands are brisk and competent hot broth, blankets warmed on the stove, mittens off slow so skin doesn't come with. "Don't rub the frost," she says to Harris without looking up. "And don't tell him to man up, unless you want to see me try it on you." Dr. Wilson arrives with a bag that rattles with glass. He checks Billy's fingers and toes, ears and nose pink, slow returning. Thank God he listens to his chest, frowns, listens again. "He's got a mind sickness," the doctor says finally. "Common up here as frostbite and harder to treat. Warmth, food, time, conversation. Bring him back to himself with the sound of himself." So you do that. For days, one of you is always with him, reading newspapers from outside until the ink becomes a rope, describing meals you plan to cook when vegetables are a thing again, telling jokes that aren't funny because the punchline is that you're still here to laugh at all. Mrs. Wilkes makes willow bark tea and says it tastes like hope if you drink it with your eyes closed. Frank brings ledgers to balance next to the bed so the scratch of pencil sounds like purpose. Harris tells stories from old rushes he swore he wouldn't tell again, and they end with him alive, which is a kind of medicine. On the 4th day, Billy looks at you with eyes that have people in them again. "I can't stay," he says, voice hoarse from not using it. The words shock the room with their solidity. "If I stay, I'll end up in that shed again. And the next time, I won't know to crawl inside. We'll get you to spring," you say. "Too fast. I'll get me to spring," he answers. And you realize he's already saving himself. Then home, home, a word that rings like a bell under the ice. You think of Seattle's salt on the air, rain that pretends to be gentle while it ruins your socks, Margaret's kitchen with its stubborn warmth. You think of the shop you've built here out of skill and stubbornness. You realize 2 things can be true at once: that you belong to your people and that you've made something of yourself in a place that didn't care whether you did. After Billy says it out loud, the room looks different. Plans rearrange themselves on the table like cards in a hand that might finally win. Frank nods and doesn't try to talk him out of it. The North has taught him not to argue with a man who knows his limit. Harris stares at the stove and says, "Spring'll come when she's ready." He says it like a benediction and a dare outside. February staggers toward March, and the light does what it does every year. No matter how men in this town feel about it, it returns. First it carves 5 extra minutes into a morning, then a dinner's worth into a night. The aurora starts to look less like the main event and more like a curtain call. On the ridge, spruce silhouettes sharpen against a sky that remembers blue, and you feel something in your chest thaw in answer. The work doesn't get easier, it never does, but The walk to it feels less like a death march and more like a path you chose. You fashion a staircase for a man who struck it stupid rich, and who wants a house that says so. You inlay a newel post with a simple curve, because your hands remember beauty even here. The man walks the stair like he owns the world, and says he wants the same craftsmanship in 2 more buildings. His dust weighs the same as any other man's, but it feels like it could buy you choices. Night. After Billy is asleep and the stove purrs its contentment, you take out your sister's letter and unfold it until the creases threaten to give up. You trace the sentence about your father with your thumb. You picture him at his bench, fussing over a joint until it fit the way a story fits a life. You tell him, out loud, in the empty room, what you built today. And for a shocking instant you can swear you hear him grumble about your knife being dull and tell you he's proud. Spring is still a rumor made of ice groans and gull cries on dreams, but it's coming. You can smell it in the way the cold changes from bite to mere complaint. You can hear it in the river, a baseline beneath the quiet, the deep, patient sound of pressure building under a lid. Billy starts writing. Letters, home lines, and lines about the trail and the pass and the river and the nothing that almost took him. He writes like a man building a bridge back to himself. Frank sharpens pencils and counts flour sacks and tells you in a private moment that Northern Commercial wants him permanently. Harris admits he's thinking about Dominion Creek Comthor. 1 more season. He says, like a gambler, promising it's the last hand. And you don't argue, because the North will handle that conversation better than you can. 1 night the sky does a thing it hasn't done in months. It glows late and then stays. You step outside, and the street looks like something from a faraway painting, wet light on packed snow. Men's breath rising like incense, the town's bones showing strong beneath winter's last heavy coat. That bass line from the river sounds louder. The Yukon is clearing its throat. Soon, you tell the dark. Soon, when the ice finally lets go, it won't whisper till explode. And with the first steamboat will come oranges, newspapers, a flood of new fools, and a hard decision. Go home with what you've saved, or double down on the North with a partnership offer you never saw coming. Asterisk, the Yukon doesn't thaw so much as it remembers. First, the ice complains in the night like old timbers in a storm. Then it starts speaking in full sentences. On a morning that smells faintly of wet iron and last year's leaves, the river clears its throat and the entire town shuts up to listen. You stand on the bluff with half of Dawson, the other half already sprinting down to the bank. A low groan rolls up the valley, the sound of pressure turning into decision. Cracks etch the surface, black lightning frozen in glass. A kid swears he sees the ice lift a full foot, and everyone tells him he's lying right, until it lifts too. The first break is not a break so much as a convulsion. The far bank heaves. The ice sheet fractures into rafts the size of houses. The whole river grinds itself like a mill that forgot to be gentle. The sound is cannon and cathedral. Artillery booms as slabs rear and flip. A pipe organ chord as water finally finds its voice. Men cheer like the home team just won a pennant. Dogs bark themselves hoarse at a monster they don't understand. Ice chunks ride up onto the shore and then slither back as the current decides where everything goes. A temporary dam forms downstream. The water stacks behind it, and Dawson rushes to move anything valuable above the line somebody swears is safe. The Monte Carlo ruins are far enough back to escape a second humiliating baptism. The sign promising new Monte Carlo coming spring flaps, then rips. then flaps again with a stubbornness you recognize. For 3 days, the river argues with itself. Pressure ridges appear like dragon backs and then vanish, swallowed whole by a deeper current. Logs tumble past with bark flayed, all muscle and intention. A frame house that should have been moved in March floats by intact. A miniature Dawson drifting through the real one, a grim diorama of poor planning. On day 4, the first steamboat whistle carries up the valley like a rumor that can finally stop being one. The SS Alice announces herself with a plume of smoke that smells like worldliness. She shoulders the current, wheel-biting brown water, stacks barking with confidence. Behind her, men line the rails in coats from places where winter is a season rather than a personality. The dock is a carnival before the bow even kisses its merchants, cursing and laughing. Dogs yodeling, women standing calm as metronomes amid the chaos. Boys with wire-tied news bundles shouting headlines no one has heard in 6 months. Oranges appear. Potatoes that taste like something besides survival. A crate of tomatoes, saccharal tomatoes, makes the crowd gasp as if someone opened a chest of rubies. Prices drop by fractions, and men feel rich simply because the world widened. Mail is a storm. The Mounties guard the pile with a gentleness you didn't know they had. When the man reads Thomas Reed, you put your hand up like you're answering in school. Margaret's letter is dated February and smells faintly of wood smoke, which is to say, home. She tells you the rain hasn't stopped nagging Seattle since October. That Robert took on a boy who planes as if it's still an art. That the baby learned to say your name and says it to the cat when it doesn't listen. Between the lines, there's a sentence she's too good to write. Come back if you're done proving you can build in any climate at all. You fold the letter, put it near your heart, and watch the world pour off the boat. The steamer isn't just mail and fruit. It's a new generation of optimists wearing the expression you wore last summer, a mixture of appetite and ignorance, and a belief that the rules will bend for them because they asked politely. They carry brand new gold pans like they come with instructions. They ask where the creek is that pays, the way a city man asks where the good coffee is. You want to laugh, but you don't. This place has a way of handling its own education. Billy's leaving is now a when rather than an if. He stands at the rail the next morning on Alice's downstream run, slimmer and steadier, clutching a letter of reference from the assay office and a hard-learned understanding of himself. You press a small pouch into his pommin of dust to buy comfort between here and Portland and a good meal when he gets there. Right as soon as the dock stops moving, you say. He grins, eyes bright in a way you haven't seen since Seattle. I'll write from the first place that sells coffee for less than a day's wages. Asterisk. Frank shakes his hand like brothers do. Harris claps him on the back with more softness than he'd admit. 2. Mrs. Wilkes wipes her hands on her apron and then wipes her eyes on the same apron and scolds herself because rules are how we keep the door on its hinges. As the Alice slides away, Billy waves until you can't be sure if the small figure at the stern is him or a trick of light on the water. You stand there longer than is necessary because farewells ask for more time than arrivals. When you finally turn, Dawson looks the same and not at all. The town's pulse quickens with open water. The northern commercial bursts like a seed pod. Frank moves through the aisles like a conductor, keeping a symphony from falling apart. He's assistant manager on paper now, and in truth, when the boss is too busy counting crates to count on himself. You see him at dusk some nights, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, ink on his fingers, smiling the smile of a man who just discovered that competence is a currency. Work multiplies under your hands. Winter commissions bloom into summer deliveries. Doors you built in February swing open to let June in. Trim that you cut by lamplight gleams in sun you're still not used to seeing at midnight. The bonanza king whose study you paneled calls you back not to complain, but to ask whether you can build a staircase that curves like a woman's laugh. You can. You do. You step back when it's done and feel the jolt you used to get, when a line of poetry in a newspaper made more sense than it should. And then Johnny Lind walks into Sorensen's yard and changes the problem you've been happily wrestling with into a different one entirely. Read, he says, as if that's a greeting and an offer. Walk with me. He takes you past stacks of spruce, past oxbows of iron strap and nails in kegs, out to the bright, busy chaos of Front Street. You have a gift, he says, almost casually. Most men can make boards stay together long enough to keep the weather out. You make them talk. You're not the sort to turn red because a rich man likes your work, but there's heat in your ears anyway. I make them stay together, you say, defaulting to modesty as if it were a tool on your belt. He snorts. Don't argue about the wrong thing. Argue about this. He stops, gestures broadly new hotels, rising like mushrooms after rain. Restaurants that were shacks in December and are two-story promises now. A saloon whose sign is better painted than some men's futures. Every one of these places needs to look like money to men with money. They need stairs that don't complain. Counters that make a man put his hands down and want to buy something. Chairs that feel like a decision. I've got partners in Skagway and Nome. We're opening houses that require furniture that won't collapse the first time a drunk falls into it. Sorensen's great, but he's a lumberman. I need a what's the word? A housewright for interiors. A foreman who can teach taste to sawdust. You'll have to find one, you say, because this is a conversation that wants you to be cautious. His grin has the glint of a man who never learned how to lose. I did. He lays it out like a map. A proper shop, bigger than Sorensen's back room with better light. A decent steam box for bending. A lathe that'll turn without threatening to throw its meal. A small kill so green wood doesn't lie to you. He'll secure the contracts in Dawson, in Skagway, in the fever that Nome is about to become. You'll build, direct, hire. Profit split after costs, generous to a fault unless you're a lawyer, which you are not. He talks timelines and railings and dining sets like a general talks brigades and artillery. You'd be your own name, he finishes. Not a man on my crew. A partner. The word lands like a hammer square on a nail. Satisfying, decisive. A little frightening because now the piece is set and the only way to free it is to break something. You ask for a night. And he grants two because rich men can pretend to be patient when the math already works. You walk back through Dawson's late light with your head full of the smell of plain spruce and hot hide glue and a sense new. Expensive that your problem is no longer survival. It is selection. That night you lay the offer on the table beside the bread and the beans. Frank leans back, steadies your face like it's a window and he can read the weather through it. Feels like a yes, he says. Because it is. Harris runs a thumb along the rim of his mug. He's been quieter since breakup, turning something over inside him that isn't quite regret and isn't quite advice. Building things, he says finally. That last, that people touch every day. That's a kind of gold. Then why are you going up Dominion next week? You ask, gentle as you can manage. He smiles with half his mouth. Because some of us are made of bad habits and good swings. He shrugs. Lynn's putting together a big operation. He asked if I'd take a foreman slot drive cruise, keep the drift straight, stop boys from mistaking air for pay streak. 10% of production, he said, and I said I'm not stupid enough to believe the first number a man like that offers. And he laughed and raised it. Mrs. Wilkes clears plates and interjects without asking permission because she doesn't need it. You'll do it, and then you'll come back, she tells Harris. And if you come back broke again, I'll feed you anyway. Because I'm not going to let you teach these boys that fortune equals food. Laughter eases the room. Later, when the dishes are dry and the stove turns from raw to purr, you spread out your ledgers and count. Dust saved over winter, plus Lynn's first payment, plus Sorensen's last settlement, equals enough to buy tools you've been dreaming of. Enough to pay men for a month before the first invoice clears. Enough to fall on your face without breaking your teeth. You write to Margaret before you sleep about Lynn's offer. About the way building a curved rail feels like coaxing a line of music out of wood. About your plan to stay. Her answer won't come for weeks. And in the meantime you will have built 2 staircases and a bar top that makes men tell truth by accident. Spring rips into summer the way a 2-man saw bites. Into green spruce. Fast when both partners find rhythm. Streets turn from slurry to passage. Sleds become wagons. The northern sun refuses to go to bed at a sensible hour. Dawson learns to nap in shifts. Mosquitoes hatch in battalions and conduct campaigns on bare necks until strong men whimper and weak men buy veils. The hillsides go wild with fireweed and paintbrush as if the land is apologizing. For winter's personality and overcompensating. Work in your new shop smells like ambition. You rent a long, high room with sash windows and a sawdust floor and christen it by truing a plane until it sings. You hire 3 men, a steady Finn who measures by touch, a quiet Tlingit carver with hands that turn motifs into conversation, and a Boston runaway whose only talent, at first, is a refusal to put down the broom. You set rules, blades kept sharper than tempers. No gambling on the glue table. The last man out sweeps because pride is the cleanest finish. You tack a sign to the door. Reed and Lind Interiors. It looks right and wrong at the same time. Your name living with a name that can buy you time. In late June, as you're fitting a bar rail that curves like a river finds its bend, Harris stops by on his way out of town. He wears work canvas and the expression of a man trying on optimism that might fit this time. Dominion, he says, and you hear both hunger and history in the word. He eyes your rail, whistles low. You always were better at making things you can touch than things you can chase. He claps your shoulder. Keep a bunk for me in case. I finally get rich and want to sleep somewhere with a decent door. You always have a bunk, you say. He nods, and then he's gone. Walking toward a boat that will take him to a wagon, that will take him to a mule, that will take him to a cut bank, where the ground will make him a proposition it has made to men since the first pick bit the first gravel. Show me your back, and I'll show you who you are. The shop is busy enough that you forget to eat lunch twice the next week and only notice when your hands start to shake. You finish the bar. The owner, a woman with a poker player's eyes and a preacher's voice, runs her palm along the grain and tips you in dust and free coffee for a year. You sleep hard, wake early, and love that you are tired for the right reasons. One evening, Frank drops by after closing with a ledger in his hands and a look on his face that means the world is about to pull a chair up to your table, whether you set a place for it or not. Something you should know, he says, setting the book down and opening it to a page with numbers that look like they were written under duress. Supplies tight again. Word is to steamers hit shallows below 40.5 the freight's sitting on a sandbar arguing with a captain. Prices are tickling up. You nod, already tallying planks in your head, already revising quotes, already thanking whatever young carpenter you used to be for the habit of overbuying screws. Before you can decide whether the news is merely nuisance or early warning, a boy skids into your doorway. Breathless, hat in his hands, eyes too big. "Mr. Reed?" he says, like there could be another one. Message from Dominion Creek, from Mr. Harris. The paper he hands you is creased and damp at the corners, as if it traveled in someone's boot. The handwriting is Harris's, but the letters wobble like a man writing on a moving thing. Found color. Not bragging paystreak narrow, but real. Need another pair of hands that can think. If you ever wanted to see a winter job turn into summer fortune, now would be a good time to visit. You look up. The shop smells like hot shavings and promise. Outside, Dawson hums with appetite. On the page, a friend's hope leans toward you. You can taste the sawdust in your teeth and the dust of gold in your mouth at the same time. Lynn's partnership is finally standing on its own legs. Harris is finally standing on ground that wants him. The North sets 2 doors in front of you and, as usual, refuses to label them. Which one do you walk through? Asterisk, you stare at Harris's note until the letters stop looking like letters and start looking like a map you've already walked. Found color. Not a brag, he swears. Narrow but real. It's the kind of message that has sent men to ruin and a handful to legend. Your hands smelled like hot shavings and hide glue, the clean scent of making. Outside, Dawson thrums with commerce. Steamboat whistles, dogs yodeling, a piano testing its courage through a saloon door. Inside, the shop hums lathe still warm, plain resting like a well-fed cat. 3 men who count on you to keep the light on and the saws honest. Lynn's offer has turned into a room with your name on the door and orders stacked like cordwood. You've got a bar top drying. A staircase templated on the floor in chalk like a dance you're about to teach. And a delivery schedule that would make a bishop swear. On the bench, though, lies a creased paper that smells like creek mud and certainty with a question mark. You walk the choice to the river and back. Stay. Build a business that can survive a winter and a panic. Give Dawson something solid to put its elbows on. Go. Help the friend who walked you over the golden stairs, who watched your back at White Horse, who has finally found a vein that talks back when you ask it a question. You can hear your father's voice in both options. Take pride in your lines. Take care of your people. By evening, you've made the only decision that lets you look at your tools without them judging you. You'll go for a week. Bring eyes, hands, and the kind of brain that knows how timber wants to be set against weight. Leave the shop in capable care. The Finn can run straight work. The Tlingit carver can turn edges into language. The Boston broom will either become a helper or get pushed back to sweeping with dignity. You scratch a note to Lindat Dominion for 7 days. Shop on schedule. Send any rage to the river. It knows what to do with a tanned Tuck Margaret's letter in your pocket like a charm. The road to Dominion is the color of dust and the sound of ambition. Wagons groan. Mules consider your worthiness with ears alone. Men move with a gait you recognize from mirrors half hope, half calculation. The creek valley narrows as you go, spruce tightening into a whispering audience. Camps sprout along the cut banks. Shack, stovepipe, stack of cordwood, the eternal triangle of shelter, heat. And the future, Harris's camp sits where Dominion makes a polite bend, as if pausing to bow before turning to its next argument with bedrock. You see the windlass first a clean A-frame head towering above a square-mouthed shaft, spoked drum wrapped in rope, ladder of notched logs disappearing into dark. The timbering is good because Harris knows you'll judge him on it. He steps out of the cabin in canvas that remembers winter and grins with the particular relief of a man who gets to be right for once. You came, he says, as if you're not standing there. You wrote, you answer, and he crushes you in a hug that carries sawdust and creek silt and the last of your grudge from Christmas. He walks you through the operation the way a proud father walks a friend through a nursery. For men on the crew, a Swede with 4 arms like axe handles, a Torondic man named Noah whose eyes missed nothing, a sourdough called Benton who measures life by the cup, and a kid from Illinois still learning where to put his feet. Harris shows you the drifting yards in doglegging to follow a ribbon of old riverbed like a rumor through history. The sets are true, caps snug against posts, lagging tight. He talks Thor cycles, night fires banking heat into permafrost, morning muck scraped and hoisted, afternoon stockpiles, building for a sluice that won't sing until water does what water does in spring. Then he pours a cleanup onto the rough plank table, and your breath forgets its job for a second. It isn't a miner's tall tale. It's proof, not fist-sized nuggets. You've seen those in newspapers and in lies but coarse, flakes and small shot. The kind of color that looks like it will add up quietly to something a banker can respect. 8 days running, he says softly, as if he might spook it. You walk the camp like an inspector who also loves the work. The windlass wants a cross brace, another foot down to stop a shimmy under load. The ladder rungs are too far apart for the kid's stride. The stove in the drift needs a stone apron so sparks can't flirt with timber. You say all this. Harris nods like a man relieved to be told what he already suspected. You admire the ore bauxite joints, 3 iron straps, pitched bottom to dump clean. Built it last week, Harris says. A flicker of pride that feels like old times at supper beans. Bacon, biscuits that taste like apology. Talk about the plan. Weak, you say. I promised myself and the men. Harris doesn't hide the pinch in his face, then uncovers it and shrugs. Weak, he agrees. We'll use it like it's more. The days are rhythm. Dawn banked the fire down below, carry heat into walls that would rather be stone. Mid-morning, muck hoisted in squealing buckets, 2 men on the bar, one at the brake, one at the dump. Noon, lash more lagging, set another cap, test the windlass brake until it sings the right note. Afternoon, shore, scrape. Shore again because you have learned in 2 trades that structure is what buys you time. You tune the windlass like a violin, resetting gudgeons, boxing the bearings with tallow until friction turns from enemy to partner. You add a second dog to the brake so a tired man can trust wood and iron more than he can trust himself. You cut a proper manhole through the lagging every 8 feet so no one has to back out adrift like a sinner when speed matters more than grace. On the 3rd night, the creek reminds you it doesn't care about calendars. A bank upstream lets go with the sound of furniture being thrown downstairs. Floodwater surges into your bend, not a biblical wall, but a hard, steady shove that makes the whole road slither and the ore pile look like sugar in rain. You and Harris and Noah turn into engineers in the space of a heartbeat. You crib the river's new edge with whatever the camp can spare around, waist lagging, even a broken sled runner stacking, wedging, stomp compacting until the water reconsiders and chooses lower ground. You go to bed, damp, cold, and smug. On the fifth day, the drift tells you a truth you already knew. Permafrost means your ceiling is patient until it isn't. There's a tone to timber under loadsut. A question more than a statement. Noah hears it first. Cap's not happy, he says, low. And you stop everything because the only thing stupider than ignoring that sound is pretending you didn't hear it. You call for wedges and quiet. In the lamplight, the drift looks like a throat swallowing. The cap checks a fraction, enough to make your stomach set. You slide a slip wedge between post and cap. Tap, it sings. Tap again, sing. Third tap, something changes in the air. Out, you say, calm like a prayer. The kid freezes because this is his first time in a room that wants to become a room full of regret. Harris moves not fast because fast is panic, but decisive. He shepherds the boy, hand between his shoulders, your hand on the cap, Noah holding the lamp high like a blessing. The cap slips in, then holds, because the wedge listened. You breathe again to bends later, and add a second post to that set. A memorial to a lesson you didn't pay too dearly to learn that night. While the men pretend not to watch you recut to caps with shoulders enough for a giant. Harris finally asks the question that's been splintering in him. You could stay, he says, knife working a stick into a shape that might once have been a spoon. Split foreman with me. Colors there. We widen, we timber proper, we ride it. You look at the timber. You look at his hands. You look at the sliver of night that lives between roof and wall, where wind writes letters no one can read. And you think of your shop, sun through tall windows, the curl of a shaving rising off a sharp iron like a secret, the bar top waiting for hands, the staircase chalked like choreography. You think of 3 men who said yes to your name on a door. Asterisk, I can't, you say, and his wince is a fraction slower than honesty. I won't, you correct gently. I'll give you what I promised and enough notes to keep a church standing. Then I go back to building the things people touch when they're not holding a shovel. Harris nods because he is a decent man even when he is disappointed. Make me a list, he says. So long even Benton won't whine about it. You make the list. It's half carpentry, half superstition. Brace here, dog there. 2 more sets long before you think you need them. Pile cordwood where the river can't reach it. Send the kid to Dawson for a day to remember a street. Teach Benton a better way to swear so he stops cursing the cap and starts cursing his own lazy chalk line. Asterisk. On the 7th day, a man with a grin like a fox in a henhouse strolls into camp with papers that smell like ink and audacity. He is taller than his sense and dressed like he brings civilization rather than Trouble City boots, an Eastern hat that hopes the creek will admire it. Gents, he says, and makes a show of checking his notes as if he can read. I represent Dawson, Consolidated. We've acquired contiguous ground and recorded rights to this tributary flowage. He gestures vaguely at everything that makes your work possible. I regret to inform you, he does, not that small operators will soon be out of compliance. Safety, he adds, and looks at your head frame the way a taxman looks at a full bakery. Harris laughs, which is a good sign. He laughs like a man who's been threatened by bigger men and seen them fall through rotten ice. We've got our recorder's stamp and our backs, he says. You've got paper and a mouth. We'll see who Winter believes. The emissary smiles tighter, tips a hat none of you respect, and leaves without stepping in a puddle, because men like that are very good at not touching the ground they stand on. Noah watches him go with a face like stone, warming in sun. More will come, he says. They always do when the first one doesn't get what he wants. You finish the week like you're on a clock with a conscience. On your last night, you walk the drift one more time, hand on timbers that now hold with the quiet confidence of things built right. Above ground, the stars are rude in their abundance. Harris hands you a poke your share of a week's color and you push it back. By lagging, you say. He pushes it forward. By whiskey for Mrs. Wilkes, he counters, and grins when you take it because he knew he would win if he put her name in it in the morning. The creek rides beside you as you head back. A low companion whispering what it always whispers. I was here before you. I'll be here after you. Do something worth a space while you're between. Dawson rises out of the valley haze like an idea turning into a city. Your shop door sticks in the heat and gives when you ask nicely with a shoulder. Inside, the world you chose is where you left it. Waiting with patience would rarely grant. The Finn nods, the carver smiles with his eyes. The Boston broom is now an apprentice with a proud blister. The bar top gleams like a lie that came true. Your plane is right where you left it. Iron singing sharp with a single test curl that lands on your boot like a ribbon. On the bench, among job tickets and a coffee cup that managed to grow a ring, lies a new envelope, thick, outside postmarked. Margaret's steady hand like a rope. You crack the wax with a thumbnail and read standing up because some words don't let you sit. She writes of Seattle's rain and Robert's good health and the baby who now says Thomas to every stranger, which is flattering and a little dangerous. Then a paragraph that feels like the moment before the river moves. A man from a furniture concern in San Francisco came by the shop, she writes. He saw the curved banister in the old McKean house you did before you left. He asked about you by name and said a firm like his could use a foreman who knows how to make timber sing. They're expanding north. He said Dawson is loud right now. He asked if you were ready to come home and be loud somewhere else. You set the letter down, and the room tilts not because you're leaving, but because the world just offered you 3 futures and your hands can only hold 2 for a second without dropping the third. Dawson Consolidated is sniffing around Dominion. San Francisco is sniffing around you. Lynn's contracts are multiplying like rabbits with good credit. The river taught you that pressure finds the cracks, which seemed you follow before it follows you. Asterisk, you set Margaret's letter on the bench and look around your shop like a man checking whether the house he just built is still his after the bank changed its mind. San Francisco, a foreman's chair with polished arms and a window that doesn't rattle. A city where winter is a coat you argue about, not a season that takes fingers. A salary you could write down without wincing, a path your mother would understand, and hear sun punching through sash windows. A bar rail waiting to be coaxed into a curve. 3 men who now glance at you for the next measurement the way soldiers glance at a sergeant. When the smoke thickens, Lind wanders in without knocking, as if the building is his which, in half the legal senses, it is. He reads your face the way a miner reads the cut of gravel in a pan. Good news or news that thinks it's better than we are? He asks. San Francisco wants to talk, you answer, and it is both of those. He nods, unsurprised. Of course they do. Men who build in mud and 60 below are interesting to men who build where gulls swear at you. You going? Not now, you say, hearing the certainty as you say it. Not this season. I gave you my name on the door. I gave Harris a week and a list. I gave this town a staircase and a bar top and my best iron. I won't break that for a city that just learned how to spell me. He laughs, not triumphant, but pleased, like a gambler who didn't need to bluff. Then let's make sure that when you do go south to show them, you bring a blue book of work that shuts men up. He thumbs toward a roll of paper under his arm. Speaking of, the Imperial Hotel wants a lobby that tells men with gold they made the right sin. 2-story stair, gallery rail, reception desk that makes a fellow put his hands down like he's confessing. We outbuild San Francisco from here. You choose. It feels less like a fork and more like a braid you're laying in wood. Dawson first, San Francisco later if the grain approves. The summer flexes. You hire a 4th pair of hands, the Boston broom graduates, to apprentice, and a new broom takes his old place. The fin tunes the bandsaw so finely it sings a note that turns heads in the alley. The Tlingit carver shows you a pattern from his auntie's villager, repeating salmon bony motif there. With his say-so and your care, you adapt into a stair bracket that looks like the Yukon drew it. You set work rules with a chalkboard. Pay Friday, strops hung, no nitrogen monoxide, planing after midnight, neighbors will mutiny. Outside, carts groan under crates, and Dawson pretends, for a brief, shimmering stretch, to be a normal town with abnormal daylight. Then paper arrives, dressed like trouble that washed its hands. A Mountie in summer red, hat at the proper angle, knocks with his knuckles, because men in red always get good doors. He carries a folded notice, sealed with a flourish. Recorder's office, he says. Hearing in 2 days. Dispute on Dominion Creek, claims numbered 24 to 28 above. He taps the paper. You're listed as witness. Harris's name is on the next line. So is Dawson Consolidated. You feel your jaw set before your eyes finish reading. 2 days later, the recorder's office is a courtroom for people who don't own wigs. Miners in work shirts. Company men whose boots are scared of mud. A judge who wears his patience like a coat and his gavel like he wishes it were a The clerk's pen scratches like a mouse chewing flour. Dawson Consolidated sends the same slick envoy you met at Dominion. Now, with friends who smell like ink in New York, they lay out maps so crisp they threaten to crack. Contiguous rights, he says, letting the syllables roll like he owns them. Tributary flowage, hydraulic displacement. He uses safety, the way some men use amen. Harris stands when called and gives the court the voice he uses on cruise plane. Precise, unafraid to say, I don't know where he doesn't. He lays out the shaft, the sets, the thaw cycles, the fire stoves, the lagging you insisted on. He does not brag, which makes him more persuasive than a man who would. When the recorder asks for a witness who can attest to the headframe and drift condition, your name comes. You nod to the judge and tell the truth, because wood under load and words under oath deserve the same treatment. What you saw, what you changed, what you'd tear down if it didn't listen. The company man leans on sarcasm. So, Mr. Reed, he purrs, you consider yourself an expert in mining now, and carpentry. I consider myself an expert in not burying men, you answer. The room doesn't laugh, but it leans your way. Noah speaks last. He doesn't raise his voice, because the room already leans in to hear him. He talks history, his people fishing that bend before any man in suspenders knew the word dominion. He talks water like it's a person. He talks about how winter doesn't care about maps. When he finishes, the recorder does a thing you've seen very few officials do. He listens for a moment after the words are done. He renders something between wisdom and compromise. The court will not strip recorded claims based on speculative consolidation, he says, as if he had the phrase ready and saved it for the right day. Safety orders stand. Head frames will be inspected monthly. Tributary flowage decisions are deferred until spring freshet can be observed in situ. Meanwhile, work. His gavel taps once like a nail set flush. Outside, the envoy tips his hat with the kind of smile that says, "This was a rehearsal, and the play opens on a different stage." "Until next time," he says to Harris. "Bring a lawyer, bring a shovel," Harris replies, and the Mountie coughs to hide a laugh. You walk back to the shop, with the peculiar lightness that follows a victory you know is borrowed. The Imperial's drawings unfurl across your bench, lines and arcs that look like music on paper and like labor in the hand. You sketch the stringer, measure the rise and run. Check the math twice, because stairs are where men prove whether you respected them. The carver transfers the salmon bony motif onto brackets and says a quick prayer you don't ask him to translate. Asterisk, asterisk. Lynn secures a crate of mahogany that arrived on a steamer by accident, meant for a banker's desk in Juneau. He pays the price of a foolish man's dream and calls it a bargain. You and the Finn rip it into rails that glow like river water at dusk. You steam bend the gallery rail, clamping it against a form like a lover who needs persuasion more than force. The shop fills with the sweet bitter smell of hot lignin and ambition. Dawson, sensing spectacle, does what towns do. It prepares to watch. Word spreads that the Imperial will open with a proper lobby, a staircase instead of a ladder, a desk that says please even when it says no, a chandelier that survived the Chilkoot in pieces and wants to be a miracle again. Miners promise to come clean. Their dogs promise no such thing. Opening day lands like a festival. The northern sun pretends to set and then changes its mind. Women in dresses that outsmart dusts stand on the boardwalk and pretend not to shiver. Men who have not had reason to stand tall in months straighten their backs because a newel post carved with care makes even a broke man feel like he could one day pay his bill. You arrive early to wipe handprints that aren't worthy yet. Lind, in a suit that makes him look like he ate a bank, checks the desk height with a palm and nods. Mrs. Wilkes appears in a dress with a shawl that might have been a quilt in another life and gives the stare a pat like a blessing. The Tlingit carver, in shirt and vest, stands back with arms crossed and eyes soft. His salmon bones run up the stringer like a story that knows its ending. The lobby fills. The chandelier does its electric trick, a wheeze, a flicker, a gasp of light so steady it feels like a vow. The piano in the corner remembers a waltz. A Mountie shines like a berry in his red and pretends he didn't polish his boots twice. The Imperial's owner, a woman with a ledger brain and a gambler's laugh, takes her place behind the desk and makes eye contact with the room until the room behaves. A kid with a broom stands in the doorway and peers as if into a world that might be his if he keeps his hands where you told him to put them. Frank slips in near closing, tie askew like he ran from a shipment and didn't apologize. He runs a hand over the rail and smiles because he knows what it took. And for an hour, maybe two, Dawson wears civility like a suit that fits. The town that burned and froze and starved and swore acts like a place where you could bring a mother without lying. The stair holds the weight of men who didn't know furniture could make them feel like somebody worth seating. The desk holds the elbows of men who haven't leaned on anything honest in months. The floor holds the steps of women whose feet have been standing too long. It is, in its way, a sacrament built with mallets. Then reality walks in with a limp. Benton Harris's Benton, who measures life by cups and has been nursing less and less lately, arrives with a telegram. Scissored, open dot, shaft settled, no one buried. Need your eyes. Come if you can. Sure, read it twice, because your body wants to panic and your brain doesn't. No one buried is the best line a miner's telegram can contain. Settled means permafrost remembered itself. Need your eyes means the list you left was a rope and they need more rope. Lind reads over your shoulder, face darkening like weather. Go, he says before you ask. Take the fin, leave the broom to sweep and the carver to be king. I'll stand at the door and tell anyone who asks we planned the delay because we like to make men want things. You saddle the problem like you've done since Seattle. Tools in a roll. Rope, wedges, lamp that doesn't lie. The fin adds a box of dog spikes and a bag of tricks he's not named yet. You write a note for the carver. Imperial is yours tonight. Make sure the salmon keeps swimming. He grins and taps his chest. They always do. On the way out, Mrs. Wilkes catches your sleeve. If you break my boys, she says, I will make a stew with your name in it that no one will eat. She presses a parcel into your hand anyway. Bread, jerky, a slice of something sweet. Love disguised as logistics. You leave Dawson at an hour when even the river seems to be thinking of bed. The road to Dominion is a shadow ribbon, the trees black cutouts against a sky that refuses to stop being a painting. Somewhere behind, the Imperial's piano plays a song that says people belong. Somewhere ahead, the ground is asking questions again. Midway to camp, a rider flags you down, Noah silent as snow when he wants to be. His horse barely sweats. A section bowed in the old Thor, he says, we held it with wedges and prayer. It wants you, you nod. Then it gets me. Down in that shaft, timber will argue with rock, and you'll have to convince both that men get to leave upright. Back in Dawson, company men are sharpening papers and San Francisco is sharpening pencils. The North smiles its thin smile. It's about to see how good you are at keeping promises in two directions at once. Asterisk. Noah leads you and the Finn into camp at an hour when even the dogs sleep with one eye closed. The headframe looms out of the dim like a gallows with a better future. Lantern light throws slow halos on the windless drum. The rope hums a tired note in the breeze. Harris meets you at the shaft collar with a face that says he's done the right things in the right order and still wants your hands on the next. Decision, set bowed, he says without ceremony. Cap tried to shrug. Posts didn't like it. We wedged and braced. It's holding like a stubborn uncle. I'd like it to hold like a church. You peer down. Heat ghosts out of the throat of the shaft. The Thor stove below is sleeping, but the earth remembers. The smell is wet bone and old summer. You check the brake, test the dog. Run your fingers along the rope and feel the whisper of twisted hemp telling you its story. The Finn kneels and listens not with ears, but with fingertips on the sill like a doctor taking a pulse through wood. We go quiet, you say. No heroics in the first hour. Wedges, dogs, cribbing. We talk to the ground like we want it to tell us we're clever. Harris nods once. Benton appears with 3 mugs that aren't coffee and looks embarrassed about it. Mrs. Wilkes would throw them, he mutters, setting them aside. He grabs the brake bar and finds the rhythm he learned in winter when cold. Taught him honesty. You drop on the rope-slung stage, 2 planks, a slat and a faith in physics lowered by men who, like you, bet a topside, but love you for going below. The lantern's halo discovers the drift in bites, set, each one a timbered sentence. Sill, posts, cap, lagging. The bowed set shows itself like a bruise cap with a belly, posts leaning toward each other like gossiping men. Your wedges from last week are still where you coaxed them. They've kept the ceiling where ceilings belong, but the wood's been thinking about other possibilities. Heat did it, Noah says from behind you, voice steady as a level. Night fire chewed more than it should. Permafrost softened, then remembered being rock at noon. You lay your palm on the cap. There's a tone under your skin like a string tuned a hair sharp. We take the sharp out, you say. No pulling, no cussing. We grow this set a spine. The fin passes you a slip wedge and a sledge with a face dressed clean. Harris braces a post with his shoulder because he doesn't know how not to be part of any solution within reach. You tap twice, sound bright and stupid. You move to a different angle and tap again lower, more promising. On the 5th tap, the cap exhales, the wedge drinks, the tone drops, a quarter note. The drift breathes with you, a little enough. You layer dogs over the cap like belt and suspenders, and the wisdom of old carpenters who died in their beds. You, sister, a 2nd post beside the 1st. Pin them together with dog spikes. The fin drove off his knee on the way down. You backlag the set with cribbing, because sometimes honor means redundancy. When it's done, the bruise looks less like a wound and more like a story you can tell without your throat tightening. 2 more sets ahead need love, Harris says, reading the drift the way you read grain. And the stove down there keeps spitting sparks like it's mad at us. You reach the stover, black-bellied. Iron-mouthed thing squatting in a side cut like a troll you bribed last night who woke up wanting double. Someone, Benton's guilty silence is loud, had been feeding its slab ends too quick, letting coals fall and drowse where timbers dream of mold. You build a stone apron out of whatever will not burn and teach the stove manners with a shovel and birds you picked up from teamsters. Noah smiles with his eyes. We will not die of your enthusiasm, he tells the fire, and it's the best compliment it ever got. At the next set, the lagging has gapped frost, thawing the bark away from reality. You cut new boards by lantern, Casey jonesing, a buck saw through green like you mean it. The fin fitting each plank with the kind of respect usually reserved for names on stones. Wedges go in, a hair at a time, braid the load to the posts. Teach the cap that gravity is a negotiation, not a law. Halfway through the 2nd hour, the shaft sends a memo, a faint patter to your right, like sand learning to fall. The kid from Illinois, eyes big as quail eggs, whispers, "Is that bad?" It's honest, you answer. Bad is the thing that doesn't talk first. You shove a crib tight to the sound, find the seam, stitch it with lagging and prayer, and the patter quits like you closed a mouth mid-complaint. The stage dings from above 3 light taps. Benton asking whether you're ready to give him something to do besides worry. Up a foot, Harris calls, hand on the rope to feel the answer. The stage rises, stops, holds. You crawl under the cap to tap a wedge flush because you are not allowed to ask men to trust to set you. Haven't crawled under yourself. The lantern halos your breath. Your shoulder brushes the post. You taste thaw in your teeth. You find yourself thinking of stairs. The way a riser makes a promise to a tread. The way a stringer carries both and never brags. The drift, properly timbered, is a staircase sideways. A cap is a stringer, pretending. It calms you, that thought. It gives you language your hands can use. By the 4th hour, the bowed set has become just another set. The second trouble listens. The third never happens because it saw what you did to the first two and decided to behave. You send up the kid first because one of your rules is that boys who admit fear get a turn at daylight before men who pretend not to have it. He goes up, clutching the lantern like a church. Noah follows with the stove door so no one can feed the troll while you're not looking. The Finn goes last, muttering to the wood in a language it seems to recognize. Topside. Night is a coat someone forgot to take off. Harris pours you coffee that tastes like victory with a little hopelessness in it. Benton hovers, trying not to ask if he did good by holding the brake like it was the last true thing in the world. You clap his shoulder. Good dog, you say. Of the brake and of him. And he blushes, because compliments are rarer than whiskey. You sleep on the floor of the cabin for an hour, because sleep is the only thing smarter than work. When you wake, dawn is taking its time, but coming anyway. The creek sounds swollen louder than last night by a stanza. You step outside, and the world has rephrased itself, upstream, where Dominion pinches between two shoulders of rock. Ice and old debris have bargained themselves into a dam. Water roils behind it, brown and muscled, testing every sentence it ever heard about restraint. The makeshift crib you built during your last visit sits a foot from being clever and another foot from being stupid, which is to say, it's about to be tested. Bank will go, Noah says simply. Not prediction. Observation. You don't waste the hour deciding whether the river will do what rivers do. You use it. You and Harris and the Finn drag crib timber to the weak spot. Build a second line behind the first, like a second thought that might save a life. You drive stakes like fence posts into a bull. You lash crosspieces with wire that will not corrode in the next 5 minutes. You throw brush against the face so when the surge comes it eats haircut instead of bone. And then the surge comes. The jam downstream hiccups, then lets go all at once with the sound of a barn giving up in a storm. The river rises a hand, then another, tries your fence like a thief tries a door. The first line bows and holds. The second line complains and then decides because of physics and luck and something like affection to be brave. Water slaps, chews, contemplates your workmanship, and then chooses an easier argument over there where a lazy bend says please, when the level settles to trouble. Instead of headline, you sit on the bank and remember that exhaustion is not the same as defeat. Harris laughs short, surprised, real. I hate loving this, he says. But I do, you don't argue. The North has its ways. You leave the camp that afternoon with a promise carved into the air. Monthly inspections whether the court asks for them or not. Wedge stocks doubled. Stove doors chained like surly dogs. Harris presses a poke on you. You push it back. He presses harder. For the Imperial's chandelier, he lies. And you accept because you can spot a kindness even when it steals your wallet proverbially. Back in Dawson by the long angle evening. The shop looks like a chapel left open. The light through the high sash is honey. The bar top, oiled and proud, throws your face back at you with fewer lines than you feel. The carver left a note on the bench. Salmon kept swimming. Piano man cried. The Finn grunts and goes to sharpen something because that's how he says we did well. On your stool sits an envelope with a seal that doesn't belong to any person you love. Dawson consolidated stamp, tidy and convinced of its own correctness. You open it with a chisel because letters like this deserve something sharp. Notice of intent to commence hydraulic operations. It says, in the tone of a man announcing that rain is now illegal without a permit. All small operations within designated tributary zones must present compliance plans or vacate pending evaluation. Public meeting to be held 1 week hence. Names and dates and words like exigent that mean we brought bigger guns. You carry the paper to the Imperial because trouble reads better under a chandelier. Lind meets you halfway, mouth align but eyes amused in that way of his that suggests he likes a fair fight even when it's not. Paper boys, he says. They intend to make the creek obey the map. They intend to make us tired, you answer, which has worked on better men. You post the notice on the shop wall next to the chalkboard rules. The men read it the way they read weather, alert, not panicked, making small plans the way a fox makes runs. The broom-tend apprentice asks, do they win? You tell him the truth that keeps honest men proud. Sometimes, not today, you write to lists that night one labeled Dominion, braces, dogs, crib, stove, apron, inspection schedule, a sketch of a drift set with a second cap like a belt. Another labeled asterisk asterisk Dawson, asterisk asterisk finish the Imperial sideboard. Measure for the Pioneer's back bar. Prep bids for 2 hotels that want to look richer than they are. Pick up glass if the steamer brings it. Near midnight, though the sky refuses. To admit it, to sit on the shop threshold and let your bones arrive. The river talks in the distance, like a neighbor who can't whisper. Somewhere in the alley, a piano practices being brave. You pull Margaret's letter from your pocket and read the line about San Francisco again. The way a man touches a scar to remember both the cut and the healing. The creek changed its mind and spared you today. The papers will not. They will bring their maps and their men and their meanings. You flex your hands. They are nicked and oiled and still yours. 1 week until the meeting where money tries to redraw water. 1 week to shore up a shaft, finish a lobby, and decide what to say when San Francisco writes again with numbers that could buy winters. The Yukon has stopped shouting for the season. Now it listens. The next thing you do needs to be worth hearing. Asterisk the week leading to the meeting is 7 days of tightrope. In the mornings you're a carpenter, all muscle memory and measured angles. By afternoon you're an amateur attorney with wood glue on your cuffs. And at night you're a foreman of prayers, listing what you can protect with timbers and what you'll have to shield with words. Dawson wears anticipation like a new coat. Folks who usually argue about coffee brands are suddenly experts on riparian rights. The Pioneer prints a broadside in type so large it bends on the page. Water is everyone's mulet. No man brand IT company agents quietly rent back tables in saloons, buying rounds like elections. The Mounties remain politely non-committal, which is their way of daring both sides to behave. Your shop becomes a minor embassy. Miners you know, and miners you only know by the frost in their beards drift through. Leaning on sore horses, asking if there's anywhere in the building the paper boys can't reach. The Tlingit carver, who prefers wood to crowds, sits near the back with a pencil, sketching an older, river-wide braided. Unconcerned, and you realize he's drawing an argument the room doesn't have language. 4. Harris comes in 3 times without knocking. Each visit, a different man. First day, hot with purpose, eyes bright with offense. They want to damn thought, he says, slapping the notice as if it will bruise. Second day, weary, after pulling crib, as if crib could stop plans drawn in ink. We shored the stove room and doubled the dogs, he reports, voice even, but they mean to wash us off the map. Third day calm. We prove we can be safer than they can be profitable, he decides aloud. We take away their favorite words. Then they're just men with hats. You make your own contribution to the defense. A planed, sanded, lettered border minion cooperative safety code that lays out what you already do but now places it in a frame the recorder can hang a hat on. Monthly inspections logged and signed. Stove doors fixed on chains. Secondary caps in high-pressure zones. Wedge inventories recorded like scripture. Noah reads it and nods. Words on wood, he says. Better than words on air. Noah has been working behind the scenes with quiet power, visiting elders, trappers, and families that lived with the river when it was still deciding where to go. He asks them to attend the meeting not as decoration, but as witnesses. Let them hear the old names, he tells you. Let them feel the history in their boots. You add a section to the board. Consultation with First Peoples on seasonal changes, not charity, not theater necessary engineering. Asterisk. The morning of the meeting, the sky wears a high, gauzy overcast, like a courthouse curtain. The Imperial's lobby still smells of oil and applause from the night it opened. You touch the rail on your way past, and it feels like a friend you wish you could bring into the room. The hearing is held in the largest hall the recorder can commandeer. A public building that still thinks it's a tent. 2 potbelly stoves glow like cheeks. The benches fill quick miners, merchants, natives in Sunday shirts, packers smelling of rope and mules, women who keep books and keep this town from tipping over. Dawson Consolidated arrives in a buttoned column. You spot the envoy from before, flanked by 2 men who look like they eat litigation for breakfast and prefer it underdone. Rolls of plans under arms, a box with glass-fronted gauges none of you trust. They claim the front table as if land has already been surveyed in the room. The recorder opens with a gavel and a warning. We will maintain order, he says, sounding like a river channel trying to remember straight. He reads the company's petition into the record. The list is a sermon on progress. Hydraulic monitors to efficiently wash away banks. Flumes that will rationalize flow. Ditches that will streamline tributaries into something tidy. He rattles off conditions, some reasonable. Many loaded with exigent clauses you've learned means we can do what we want if we write it with enough Latin. Company speaks first, and the envoy is good slick as oiled oak, smooth as a bearing tuned by someone who never intended to lift anything with it. He points to a map where Dominion is a blue ribbon an inch wide. Gentlemen, ladies, he says, this is not about greed. It is about safety, science, and the inevitable march of enterprise. He smiles as if he invented water. Murmurs run like mice in a pantry. The recorder calls for responses. A few small miners go first, good men with honest words and no command of the room. They speak of sweat and living close to the edge, and the company's men let it flow past like water around a boulder that will be gone next spring. Harris stands when the recorder intones his name. He doesn't bring maps. He brings a cap in his hands. He speaks plainly, showing the second cap, the dogs. The wedge pulls, one from his pocket, holds it up like a coin you only spend once. He speaks about the night you held the crooked set until it bent back to right, not as drama, but as process. We are not reckless, he says. We are careful because we cannot afford not to be. He gestures to the code board you carried in. We wrote our own laws before you wrote yours. Then Noah walks forward. Not to the front table, but to the right side, where the windows show a slice of Yukon sky. He places a hand on the sill as if asking permission. He tells the room the river's older names. He describes high water before any flume, low water when the salmon run was fat. The way winter puts a hand on the land and spring takes it off, a finger at a time. You think shovels and pipes are new, he says softly. But men have always tried to make the river do something it does not want. It forgets slowly. Then it remembers all at once. A pause follows electric, the kind that makes a hearing and not just a reading of. Decisions already made. You go last for your side because no one else brought a staircase to a water fight. You set the code board on the easel and speak in carpenter, loads, redundancies, respect for grain, respect for forces unseen. You argue that a shaft with two caps carries pressure the way a truss carries a roof, gracefully, evenly. You say the thing about your trade that applies to theirs. There's a difference between efficiency and care. Efficiency can be measured by tons per hour. Care is measured by who goes home every night. You point to the Imperial lobby through the window, a wedge of polished wood visible down the street. We built that not because it made the fastest money, but because it made the truest town. Do the same here. The company council rises with a smile so polite it qualifies as insult. A stirring appeal from the cabinet maker, he begins. And a rumble like thunder from men who know exactly what you are passes through the room. He scolds you for sentiment. He reassures the recorder that hydraulic operations have accepted safety profiles. He invokes places you've never been as precedent for what he wants to build here. He uses relocate as if it were not another word for erase. The recorder calls recess to deliberate. The room exhales and talks in knotty clusters. You retreat to the hall with Harris and Noah, trying not to listen through the wall and failing. Lind appears like he always does, slightly late, precisely necessary. He didn't speak inside because he knows who he is in this town, a rich man. And sometimes the best help a rich man can give is to let other men be heard. He hands you a folded paper. A line of credit for Dominion, he says, low. If the recorder demands the sort of improvements only a fool or a syndicate could buy, be the fool. I'll be the bank. You open your mouth. He lifts a hand. Don't make me a saint. I'm hedging. Men will need furniture, whether they pan gold or punch time cards. You shake his hand, long and mean. The gavel calls you back. The recorder looks like a man who slept on decisions and woke with 2 answers and a headache. This court finds Dawson consolidate its plan overbroad, he begins, and the room tilts toward joy. However, and it tilts back, we accept the principle that safety and coordinated water management are compelling interests. He reads the compromise like instructions for a machine no one's built. No hydraulic washing on Dominion for 1 year. A joint safety board 2 from small operators, 1 from the First Peoples, 1 Mountie, 1 engineer not employed by either side. Mandatory logging of inspections. Caps doubled in certain zones. Monitors allowed on a different creek farther from town. An experiment, the court will observe with scruple. You do the quick math. You bought a year. You bought a seat at the table. You bought homework. Harris nods slow, satisfied. Noah's expression is something else, relief, cut with caution. They will build where the fish do not know the rules, he says, mostly to himself. You note it. Compromises move trouble to someone else's door if you're not careful. After the meeting, the street turns into a corridor of talk. Some men celebrate. A few grumble that compromise means later. The envoy tips his hat, unreadable. See you in a year, he tells Harris. Don't be late. We're already there, Harris replies, and it's not bravado. It's a plan. Back at the shop, you pin the code board on a wall with a finish nail that, for once, feels like ceremony. The apprentice runs a finger over the letters like they might smear. We get to keep digging, he asks. We get to keep digging, right? You correct? And he nods, filing that under lessons that will still matter when his hair is the color of rope. Work rushes in to fill the space argument leaves. The Imperial wants a sideboard with drawers that never lie and a mirror that flatters only when deserved. The Pioneer wants a back bar long enough to hold a month of broken vows. A banker orders a desk, and you make it to honest for his taste. You send the Finn back to Dominion with a crate of braces and a notebook ruled in inspector lines. He bares his teeth at the thought of paperwork and goes because he loves truth under load. San Francisco writes again. This letter is a gentleman leaning on a door jamb, not a salesman with a foot in it. The foreman's chair is still there. The pay still a week's dream in a day. They promise a shop with skylights and a chance to shape a city's interiors. It's the sort of phrase that can buy you an extra heartbeat on a bad day. You fold it small and put it with Margaret's words. Come, when you've built the thing here you can't yet build there, you tell yourself. It fits like a custom handle. 3 nights later, just when you think the town might slip back into the kind of normal that only exists in stories told to reassure children. A fire bell bangs 3 times different from the Monte Carlo, lower and urgent. You step out into a twilight the sun refuses to end and smell it. Not kitchen, not lamp wick tar and sawn pine and new varnish. You run with half the town toward the waterfront. Around the corner where front becomes river and hope becomes habitant, stop dead. The long, fresh lumberyard the town depends on for every winter's worth of walls and every dream's worth of doors is a cathedral of flame. Sparks jump to the river like fish going the wrong way. Men form bucket lines from the Yukon, water freezing on sleeves in a parody of fog. The stoves inside pop and roar like insulted bears. Somebody shouts that a kid might be inside, because there's always a kid inside when a story hurts the most. Linda arrives, cursing like a stevedore, and orders men the way a general orders men when he knows them. Noah takes the riverside with a crew of natives who already moved 3 camps away from danger before you smelled it. A Mountie claims the roadside with military precision. Harris is there with a team and a look that says, not again, not this time. You find yourself at the yard gate with the broom-turned apprentice at your elbow and a coil of rope in your hand. Plan. He asks eyes on you like you were born knowing what to do with fire. 2, you answer, because 1 never survives contact with heat. Get people out, get wood out. After that pray, the river remembers, we've been kind lately. Flame throws a fistful of sparks into the air. 1 lands on your sleeve. You slap it out without thinking. The lumberyard is burning, and if it goes, winter will have more teeth than usual. Somewhere in the back, a trapped voice or an echo, it doesn't matter. You go, you've saved ceilings and staircases and capsets. Now you have to save the raw future of the town itself before it turns to smoke Asterisk. Heat licks the street like a dog that never learned manners. The lumberyard breathes flame through its slatted ribs. Each board is a paragraph of dry summer and resin remembering how to be sap. Men run without tripping because the body knows what to do when wood screams. Women pin up skirts and form lines at the river. The bell clangs itself hoarse. To plans, you tell the apprentice. Rope coiled on your shoulder, lungs grabbing smoke and grit. Rescue and salvage. If we lose both, we don't get to argue about winter, we just meet it, on you, he says. Face pale, eyes lit like a forge. Lind shoves through with a crowbar in one hand and leadership in the other. South side stacked with plank and pitch barrels, he barks. North side's rough timber. If we stop it, jumping the lane to the pitch, we buy time. Noah River flank. Mounties Road flank. Read get me, that lane turned into a trench. You don't argue with a correct sentence that arrives sweating. Axes, you call. Pry bars. Two saws that don't bind. Harris appears like he came out of the flame itself, face streaked with ash. On your hip, he says, slapping a felling axe into your palm. The Finn ghosts up with a crosscut and a dozen iron dogs meant for shafts, but unsurprisingly suited to a yard about to act like a mine. The lane is a narrow throat, between stacks of perfect chimney if you let it be. You and Harris swing in rhythm, teeth into plank, metal in wood, to chew a trench where the fire will have to think twice. The Finn drives dogs into the ends of loads, and men on ropes drag whole bundles sideways to open a jagged gap. Every foot you steal becomes a rack for wet blankets, a place water can stay long enough to matter. Someone yells that a boy is inside. The yardman swears it's true. His nephew runs deliveries after curfew when he thinks no one's watching. The sound of a small, mean cough carries over the crackle. The kind of cough that turns men into ladders without thinking. Rope, you tell the apprentice, and he hands it like a surgeon. You tie in on instinct, timber hitch at your waist, a bowline bite at the end, a second line on a prusik, because you've learned too much about gravity to be romantic. Harris count to 60, you order. If we don't come out, pull and don't apologize later. He nods, angry at the idea of it. The front of the shed is a mouth choked with smoke and sentence fragments of fire. You belly low, the apprentice right behind, because he didn't learn cowardice where he grew up either. Heat eats your eyebrows. You keep left hand on the wall, right hand forward, rope a live thing on your hip. The world reduces to taste, salt, ash, touch, rough board. A nail that wants to be a dentist. And sound fire's ugly laugh. You find the boy by a stack of shingleston, sharp, ready to join the problem. He's small enough to tuck under an arm, head wrapped in your scarf on reflex. The apprentice takes the other side and you crab backward, counting breaths, because numbers have edges smoke can't round. The rope hums twice Harris's 60. You tug back, 3 coming, and the line goes slack in faith. A wave of heat tries to make you an example. The apprentice throws his wet shirt over your neck like a blessing he doesn't name. You pop into night like a cork from a bottle and everybody is suddenly louder. The yardman grabs the boy and sobs in a way men are allowed when fire is the witness. Noah's crew has already turned the riverside into a wet wall. They're working a trick you've only seen on coasts blankets dipped and slapped over rails. Water wrung down a cascade so the air itself feels soggy. The Mounties drive men away from the pitch barrels with words that sound like court but feel like mercy. Lind organizes salvage like he organizes everything by pointing at the right men and saying the right names. You go back in, of course you do this time, not for souls but for stomachs. With hooks you drag bundles of green timber out of future hell and into the lane you bought with pain. Teams on ropes haul like a string section, playing furious. The Finn and his dogs turn stacks into sleds, and the improvised sleds into safety. The fire is a brain with bad ideas. It searches for ladder stacks that line up, sheds that invite, gaps that promise air. You knock down ladders faster than it can build sense. You and Harris and the apprentice pull a run of 2x12s into the trench, lay them like a false floor, then soak them so any ember that leaps finds a bath, not a bed, and then, because you can't fight fire without breaking a few hearts, you make a decision. The heat has licked its way to a fancy load, the mahogany Lind paid for at a price that made even your pride flinch. The grain glows where flame kisses varnish. A better man would try to save it. A wiser one tonight you turns his back and saves the ordinary instead, spruce and fir and the ugly. Honest boards everyone needs to build cabins that keep lungs warm. Lynn sees you abandon wealth for winter and nods once, proud. We can buy sexy wood, he shouts over the roar. We can't by January. Hours compress. Water turns to steam on your sleeves, then freezes at the edges when you step back to breathe in the small wind. Your boots stick and then let go with a sound like truth, leaving a mouth. Men swap in and out of bucket lines, out of sore teams, out of their best ideas and into better ones, because the town's brain suddenly works. Like one mind by dawn, the fire is a sulking animal, black and sullen where it had been cheerful and murderous. The long back stack is a rib cage of charcoal. The trench is a muddy moat studded with warped plank-like bones after a hard lesson. The pitch barrels are blackened but proud of themselves. The boy sleeps on his uncle's coat. The apprentice looks 54, 5 minutes, and then 20 again when he sees the sun decide to exist. The Mountie, in charge, wipes soot from his mustache and announces the kind of victory you get in the north. We saved enough. Men cheer not because they won, but because they didn't lose everything, while the last embers sulk. You walk the perimeter as your trade requires. Fire tells the truth if you speak its language. At the far end of the south shed, where the flame was hottest but the use least likely, you find a scatter of oily rags and a busted lantern that didn't fall from any hook you can spot. The glass is wrong to clean on one side, sooted on the other like it burned somewhere else first. The smell is purposeful. You call Lind and Noah without fanfare. They stand, two kinds of old, looking at a detail that wants to be a clue. Noah squats and presses a knuckle to the dirt. Wind was north-northwest, he says. Rags were east of first flame. That's a man's idea, not a river's. Lind doesn't swear this time. He inhales like he's reminding his ribs how to be a barrel. Could be accident, he offers and does not believe. Could be a drunk. Could be someone who wants to make lumber precious enough to raise prices. He doesn't say company, and you don't either. Not yet. The Mountie arrives as if summoned by thoughts, listens, takes the lantern with the careful joy of a man who might get to do his job properly. Well, look, he says. You'll keep your eyes on everything you've already got. Back at the shop, Mrs. Wilkes waits with coffee that's more hug than drink and a biscuit you swear she baked in her pocket on the way over. The apprentice takes two and doesn't apologize. Harris leans against the door jamb in the way of men who need doors to believe in. The Finn falls asleep on a pile of shavings and looks like a saint in a very weird church. The day after a night like that turns honest men into progress. Dawson moves boards like contraband, accounts for what burned like a general counting horses. The yard's own, eyes red, ledger wet thanks you in a language halfway between English and the sound a tree makes when it falls where you told it. I had a boy in there, he says, throat a knot. You got him out. You shrug, because hero is a word that makes losses louder. The recorder posts a notice offering a reward for information about the fire's origin. The company envoy sends a wreath and a note in his beautiful hand. Deepest sympathies in this time of communal loss. Lind nails the note to a post out front where men spit. The Mountie quietly asks everyone who knew where the pitch barrels sat to write their names and times on a sheet. The paper fills quickly. Dawson hates secrets that try to be important. Work resumes because it must. The Imperial's sideboard half assembled when the night started waits, like a question you now enjoy answering. You sand the draw runners until they hum, set the dovetails until they whisper. The carver comes in with bandaged fingers you pretend not to see and lays a salmon bony border along the mirror frame because he knows. A lobby is a kind of medicine after smoke. About midday. The post rider coat, unbuttoned because he owns the Sun, this week drops 2 letters on your bench. One is Margaret's hand. The other is a neat, bank-taught script you can't place until you do. You open Billy's first because hope has a voice. Portland letterhead, ink that didn't freeze in the bottle. Thomas, it begins, and already you hear him speaking slower, steadier. He writes of a bank that is almost civilized, a room with a green lamp that hums instead of forests that do. He writes of sleep returning, of a mother who pretends she never doubted him. He writes of salmon he buys, not catches, and how it tastes less like victory but more like home. I don't regret going, he writes, but I couldn't live there. You can, or you can come home and build a house next to mine. Either way, write me a story with wood, then write me a letter with words. He includes a newspaper clipping, a brief about the Dawson hearing misreported in a way only distance can manage. It calls Noah a local notable. It calls hydraulics inevitable. It calls compromise colorful. You laugh because that's how you tell sorrow it doesn't get to win. Margaret's letter is longer the way only sisters write, with news nested inside advice and bread recipes folded around grief. She says the children still ask when Uncle Thomas is coming to measure them for a doorframe like he used to. She says Robert's business has turned a corner. A new church needs pews, a hotel wants a bar top. And does he ever consider visiting San Francisco just to see? She encloses a clipping tube from a West Coast paper with more ink and fewer facts about a big San Francisco firm courting northern talent. She underlines your name printed without permission and writes in the margin, if they take you, at least let them spell you correctly. You read both letters twice, then a third time with your eyes shut because hearing words in your head helps them find the right shelf. You feel the shape of a door between 2 rooms Dawson and the outside hinged, not locked. That night you find Harris on the Imperial stair, running a hand along the rail like a man who trusts wood, because it never pretends to be more than it is. You hand him Billy's letter and he reads it slow, lips moving like he's tasting the words. He nods at the parts about not regretting and also leaving. That boy saved himself by telling the truth, he says. Not everyone learns that in time. Do you ever think of leaving? You ask, Because you've learned to push when men park on questions. Every morning, he says, then smiles, crooked. And every morning I lace my boots and go to the shaft because the ground still needs convincing. He looks toward the river, where dark is a rumor the sun refuses to believe. Someday I'll build a cabin that I don't have to move because of some man's map. You already started, you say, thinking of the code nailed to the shop wall, of cribbing that held, of a lane soaked into a moat. We did. It's not just wood. He claps your shoulder. Once hard the way. Men substitute for hours of conversation they'd ruin if they tried. Write back to your sister, he says. Tell her you're busy building a town out of things that don't burn easy. You do. Later, at your bench, you write to Margaret and to Billy, to letters like matched boards. You tell her about the hearing and the fire, about the boy who lived and the wood that didn't, about the way a town can decide together not to lose. You tell Billy about the salmon bony border and the sideboard drawer that won't stick in February because you planned for February now. At the bottom of each letter, a postscript you don't overthink. I will visit when the river lets me and the shop can hum without my hands. Until then, watch the papers. You'll see my name on a staircase in Dawson and maybe, one day, on a lobby further south, you sand the last edge of the sideboard until it shines like an answer. Outside, the Yukon talks to itself in late summer voice. Inside, your men talk in the language of shavings and mallets that have lived good lives. The town moves, bruised and awake. Next morning a new notice pins itself to the recorder's door hydraulic. Experiment scheduled on a creek you don't love, but fish do. Noah's jaw sets like a jam. The year you bought is already being spent somewhere else. And the first grey geese of the season pass overhead, writing a V that looks like a choice. Asterisk Dawson wakes to a notice that doesn't bother knocking. It's tacked to the recorder's door like a dare, and the ink is still cocky wet. Hydraulic trial. Authorized sulfur crick observers. Welcome 10 a.m. tomorrow. Below, a paragraph in smaller type that says this limited demonstration will be conducted under the strictest modern safety protocols, which is lawyer for bring your own umbrella and forgiveness. Noah reads it once and folds it twice, like he's closing a wound he can't stitch. Fish are still running, he says, grayling dollies. If they cloud the water now, the beds won't take. The apprentice looks from the notice to you as if the paper personally insulted his mother. We can't stop them. Not today, you answer, because lies break worse than boards. But we can watch so closely they feel crowded. Harris volunteers without being asked, because Shafts taught him the value of witnesses. Lind offers wagons and men to carry measuring sticks and indignation, but Mounties send a pair with notebooks and the kind of faces that remember. The safety board you fought to establish 2 small operators. One Mountie, one engineer who carries slide rules like rosaries. And know him it's at dawn in the Imperial's lobby because it smells like decisions. That went well once. Noah lays out the plan with a hunter's economy. We watch water speed upstream and down. We measure clouding, how far, how long. We mark if beds are buried. We listen, he means, for the sound of a creek that suddenly speaks in a different voice. You bring what you have: carpentry in service of science. You've built a dozen little tools overnight. Clear-sided tubes to judge turbidity against a marked stick. A folding rod with brass pins at every inch for measuring depth. A simple weir you can stake across a side channel to trap silt like gossip. The fin hefts a crate stuffed with stakes mallets, and a plumb bob heavy enough to make an argument. The trial looks like a carnival where the rides can kill you. Dawson Consolidated's team has erected a monitor that could pass for a cannon if the cannon had opinions about geology. The nozzle gleams. The hose snakes from a pump that coughs lake water through iron veins. The envoy you've come to dislike wears a coat that isn't afraid of mud, which is a warning. Gentlemen, ladies, he announces, not needing a stage because his voice carries like a hymn. Observe modernity, he gestures, and a man at the pump throws a lever that looks like it belongs in a theater. The monitor's first breath is tentative, a spit. The second is a statement, a jet that cuts air like a sharp idea. The third is doctrine, water knifed into earth, bank turning to brown smoke under the assault, roots letting go in a chorus of little snaps you feel in your molars. The spray arcs into the cut and comes back holding a different river opalescent with silt. Angry at sunlight, you and the engineer run your little ritual. Tubes dipped upstream, clear as language. Downstream cloud the color of an argument. The Mountie writes, the fin stakes, the weir. Harris watches the bank bend to pressure and hisses under his breath. Noah kneels at the edge, palm in the current, face listening. It is a bad song, he says. The envoy narrates like a fair barker, pointing out efficiency and lift and yields per mano. He does not mention the fish that bump your boots, like ghosts confused about the stairs. You look down and see Grayling trying to breathe coffee. Time, Noah says quietly, after 10 minutes that feel like forever. The engineer nods. 15 is the limit for turbidity by any responsible standard. The envoy smiles like he hears Spanish. We're still within our permit, he says, and waves to the pump man to give it another notch. The jet bites deeper. A tree, undermined, takes a slow bow and then a sudden dive. Applause from men who have never loved shade when they finally throttle back 38 minutes that will be remembered longer than some. Marriages the creek downstream is the wrong color for a quarter mile. Noah drops a pebble in your tube and it disappears at one hand. 2, 3, 4 then shows itself, ashamed and late. The weir holds a fan of silt that feels like flour and loss. The recorder who had the good sense to come takes it all down. To his credit. We pause here, he declares, voice careful. The board will convene. Asterisk, may I speak? Noah asks, which is a courtesy the creek doesn't require. He stands without ceremony. We watched you wash the bank. The river watched you. It does not forgive quickly. He tips your tube so the envoy can see what the rest of you know in your bones. The fish need beds that aren't suffocated. The water needs to carry stones small, not dust. If you do this in spawning time, you get poor fish and poor luck. In winter, ice will not anchor clean. It will slide, and the river will walk where we do not want it. The envoy smooths his lapel. We will consider seasonal adjustments, he says, which means nothing until it does. And with proper settling ponds, Harris barks a laugh without humor. Ponds. You brought a cannon to a kitchen, and now you want to sweep. The Mountie clears his throat in a way that has saved lives. Enough for today. He glances at the recorder. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We have eyes. Asterisk. Back in town, the safety board meets in the hall where last week compromise wore its best coat. The engineer runs numbers until they line up like fence posts. You place the Weir's fan of silt on the table like a pie no one will touch. Noah lays a small trout on a piece of canvas, one he scooped listless from a pool, revived and released after it told its truth. It is alive again because he was there. It shouldn't have needed him. The board votes unanimous, save for the chair you kept empty for an outsider too. Suspend any hydraulic on sulfur until after spawn, and to review settling pond proposals with something less than charity. The recorder, to his credit, signs the order with a pen that isn't trembling. The envoy, to his credit, doesn't throw a chair. This will go to Whitehorse, he says, calm like snow. They have bigger maps. The fight relocates, as fights do. In the meantime, the town refuses to only be angry. Noah proposes a remedy not of paper. If they made the creek cough, we help it breathe. He sketches a low sill of brush and stones gabions. The engineer names them set in a pattern that slows water enough to drop fine silt before it reaches spawning beds. But not so much, the river loses its sense of direction. He looks at you. Can you build a fence that makes water polite? Only if water agrees, you answer. But I can give it options. All afternoon, the shop disgorges tools into a cause. Men tie willow into sausages of brush, lashed with wire-like laughter. You and the Finn build a jig to crimp cages from old screen and patience. The apprentice hammers stakes with the ferocity of the newly educated. Mrs. Wilkes appears with kettles and a rumor of pie. Lind sends teams to haul rock-like obligations. By sunset you've installed 3 low curtains across the creek at measured intervals. The engineer blesses the spacing with numbers. Noah blesses it with a pinch of gravel and a word older than any of you. The first curtain catches the finest silt and lets the water go on with dignity. The second slows the rest. The third wears what's left, like a little shawl of brown you can live with. Upstream, the beds begin to gleam again, like coins where you want coins to be. The next morning, because the north likes to grade on a curve, the sky lowers itself until it can smell your hat. Rain arrives sideways. The river rises like a man who just remembered an insult. On sulfur, your brush fences get their orals. The first bows holds, then shrugs a foot of mud off its shoulders with a sound like relief. The second complains and then decides to be brave. The third watches the first to work and learns always your favorite lesson. Harris comes in wet as truth, grinning. Your polite water learned a new word, he says. Thank you, the Mountie brings a different weather. We found something, he says, quiet at the threshold, like news that knows it matters. He lays a small glass bottle on your bench with tweezers. The label is mostly gone, but enough remains to read Everill Lampwhale Oil Blenduno. He points with his chin. We canvassed only 3 places in town stock whale blend. To sold none last month. The third, he produces a page from a ledger. 2 bottles, paid cash. Buyer described as. The rest of the line is smudged not, by chance, by thumb. The clerk remembers a ring, the Mountie says. Square face on the right hand. Not many men wear one like that here. Lynn stares at the bottle long enough to consider what it would feel like to throw it. He doesn't. I'll talk to the yard's rivals, he says. Quiet. If this was meant to move prices, it failed and burned bridges instead. You look at the envoy's note on the post outside there. 1 men spit anand. Keep your mouth from saying what your teeth want. The Mountie sees anyway. Don't pick your villain too early, he counsels. Men do stupid for money without needing orders. A steamer comes in under that bruised sky with a bell that sounds like a question. Mail sack, 1 letter. The San Francisco firm again. This time, the script is more intimate. Mr. Reed, it says, we admire your Dawson work from afar. Word travels. We will hold the foreman's chair through freeze-up for you. One condition only. Come before the first ice or the role goes to another. The projects you could lead, hotels, banks, the new opera house will bear a hand like yours for a generation. We enclose a draft for travel and the first month's pay as a gesture of good faith. The number is obscene in the way money only looks when your boots are still drying. You fold the letter in thirds and set it on the bench next to the bottle of whale oil and a sliver of willow from the brush fence. 3 choices, 3 smells: ink, rancid fat, green sap. You tell yourself noses know what brains deny. That night, the town is tired in the way only a town can be collectively, efficiently. You walk the Imperial's quiet lobby because Wood says things after midnight it doesn't say at noon. The salmon-bony border along the mirror frame throws back. Man who looks like he has carried a river in his pockets and found room for one more letter. Harris finds you on the stairs and sits 2 steps down because he understands altitude in conversation. Leaving, he asks, no drama or friend. I don't know, you answer, and it's the truest sentence you've spoken in weeks. They promise light and work that will last. But this, you gesture vaguely at everything. The town, the river, the brush fence that wasn't there yesterday. This is a thing too, he nods. City will teach you scale. North will teach you consequence. Both are schools worth tuition. What about you? You volley because the rule is mutual jeopardy. If the company brings bigger hoses next year, then we build bigger fences or move to a creek that still remembers us kindly, he says. Or I go where the ground lets me be useful and not just stubborn. He tips his head toward the door. Noah's making circles in the evening quiet meetings with men who carry old maps in their heads. He says there's a lake above Sulphur that could take a weir without hurting anything that makes babies. He says we can make flood into friend. You picture it, timbers cribbed into a gentle lip that holds back the tantrum and gives it back slowly. An engineer's line here, Noah's hand there, a town's shoulders under both. Your fingers twitch with the itch to draw it full scale on the floor in chalk dot before sleep can claim you. A runner bangs your shop door like weather. Dominion, he gasps. The crib above Harris's stove cut is talking loud, which is a miner's way of saying something that holds wants not to. Rain took the day as a suggestion and turned it into a policy. You grab your coat, your lantern, the double-bit axe that cuts sorrow in either direction, and run. The creek at night is a rumor with teeth. Your brush fences stand like lines in a letter the water is trying to read faster than you wrote it. The path to Harris's camp is a ribbon of mud that hates boots. The head frame appears in flashes of lightning that feels staged. Men move like ants, weighted with meaning. Below, in the stove chamber, the cap you doubled last week is humming a note you don't like higher than honest wood sings. Water sneaks in hair-thin from a seam you didn't see yesterday because it wasn't born yet. The stove throbs harder than it should. We need to relieve the roof, or it will relieve itself, you say. Voice too even for your own pulse. Secondary cap takes the load if the first fails. But we don't bet the Finn's life on that. You lay out the field surgery in a language men understand. Cut a notch above the seam to bleed pressure into a catch root, it to the sump and not the drift. Sister in a third post, wedge like you're tuning a piano in a storm. Move the stove to feet on skids you haven't built. Make a new stone apron while fire pretends to be tame. It's a night for too many hands and not enough time. The Finn and Harris brace the cap with a pair of dogs clamped so hard metal complains. You take the saw and make a relief curve where wood tells you to, counting the pitch of the groan until it drops into a note that sounds like consent. Noah stands ankle deep in the sump, directing water with a shovel the way a conductor leads. A stubborn oboe dot outside, thunder edits the sky. Inside, the stove scoots inch by inch on greased planks, while the apprentice swears with surprising range. The notch opens, the seam shows its little white teeth, and then, wonderfully, correctly quiets, giving up a thread of water that becomes a ribbon that becomes manageable, if not friendly. By dawn, the chamber is ugly but safe, braces like a forest, wedges like punctuation, stove sulking but seated. Men lean against posts and remember how to breathe without timing it. Harris's laugh is wet and grateful and only a little manic. Another day we didn't bury anyone, he says. Put that in the code. You step out into a grey that isn't sure whether to be mourning or apology. Somewhere between here and town, the recorder will wake to a desk piled with your notes. Somewhere farther south, a man in San Francisco will glance at a clock and a calendar and say your name like a problem, he hopes, will solve itself. You look at your hands. One has creosote in the lines. The other has ink you didn't wash because it felt like a vote. Together, they could build a weir above sulfur before the first hard frost. Together, they could shape an opera house banister in a city that pretends water is a backdrop. Noon brings a wire from Whitehorse. Review of sulfur decision imminent. Afternoon brings an envelope back from Juneau, the lamp ledger, with a name. Evening brings geese again lower, louder. And just as the lamps are lit on Front Street, the river barks once a sound no one hears unless they live here, and a slab of ice calves from the earliest, meanest shadow on the far bank. Freeze is coming crooked and early. The town will need both your hands tomorrow, and also, perhaps, your answer, asterisk, the wire from Whitehorse, sits on the recorder's desk, like a weather report from a far-off god. Review imminent. The envelope from Juneau is heavier, the paper rag-rich and official. When the Mountie slices it open with his penknife, the room gathers close, as if warmth could be shared by leaning. The lamp ledger shows sails down to the hour. The clerk's memory prodded by duty, and a small reward produces what smudged lines hid. Hiram Vance, Teamster Halls, freight for whichever yard pays quickest, wears a square-faced ring with a chipped onyx. Not company. Not even clever, just hungry in a way that eats other people's winters. Hiram denies it, then buckles under a question that knows where to lean. In his shed they find an empty bottle that used to say whale oil blend and a grease-black rag that still tells the truth. The Mountie walks him through Front Street without spectacle and with just enough speed to deny the crowd a chance to make justice the hard way. Lind looks at you and meets your thought halfway. Greed doesn't need a boardroom, he mutters. It only needs a price list and a coward. The envoy is nowhere near the scene, and for once you are grateful for the distance between suspicion and fact. By noon, the sky has forgotten how to be thin. The Yukon barks once, a sound like a tree cracking in a glass house. Then, with a shrug only the north can manage, winter makes an unscheduled appearance. Frasil ice-matted slush, born from supercooled water spins, like wool in a river that would rather be a road. Men on the bank cheer because the first ice is a holiday, then fall quiet when they see the color the water carries from sulfur, not brown as last week, not clear as the old days, but something between a tea steeped too long. A compromise, trying to freeze. Noah watches the current with his head tilted, listening. It will jam at the big bend, he says, pointing where the river forgets to be humble. If it does, it will back up and look for straight. Straight is Front Street. You and the engineer and the Mountie and Harris and half the town gather in the Imperial lobby because it remembers good decisions. The safety board becomes the action board because titles matter less than hands. The plan that spills across your draftsman's table is a braid of disciplines. Engineering arithmetic married to a trapper's eye, married to a carver's knowledge of how water reads a shoreline. You will build a temporary ice where above the bend cribs and brush and rock in a chevron that encourages ice to stack where banks are high, not wander where babies sleep. You will dig a relief channel through a soft section of bank the river favors when drunk, lining it with brush and stone so it doesn't learn a bad habit. And at Sulphur you will double the willow fences, because the creek is about to be graded on a much harsher curve. Can you build it fast? The recorder asks, not as a dare but a plea. Your mouth answers before your prudence can intervene. We can build it now. Dawson becomes a workshop without walls. Teams drag logs from the bone pile that night never got around to. The Finn and to Swedes who have the look of men who were born holding a cant hook stack crib boxes in the shape of inverted verses, you. And the apprentice sets string lines, whose angles Noah approves with a grunt. The engineer runs figures in a notebook, and then in his head, and then says, trust the head more. Mrs. Wilkes and every woman who trusts herself boil coffee in kettles that probably once delivered salvation in a different form at the bend. The river is a field of moving thought. Phrasal clots against your first crib with a subtle hiss that scares and pleases. You pour rock into the boxes until the crib forgets to float. Brush goes in next, laced tight so ice can't pick the knots. The chevron's open mouth faces upstream. Its teeth point toward the bank you prefer, the river to cuddle. Noah throws the last willow bundle and murmurs the old word for stay on sulphur. The apprentice hammers stakes with the stubborn joy of a convert. The new fences catch the flower you blamed the monitor for and turn it into something like bread useful, contained. The engineers, where downstream of your weirs measures the silt like a schoolmarm fussy. Relentless, right by mid-afternoon, the chevron is half a sentence. White Horse finally answers Dawson with a telegram stamped by caution. Sulfur order upheld, pending further study. Nitrogen monoxide hydraulic in spawn. Settling ponds, mandatory if ever. Board to report monthly. It is a small banner in a short parade, but you wave it anyway. The envoy reads it on the recorder's steps, folds it crisply, and bows to no one in particular. We abide, he says, as if the word were his to mint. He leaves before anyone can hear what he thinks. Clouds rip. Wind shifts north. Phrasal becomes pancakes thin discs that crowd like thoughts in a guilty mind. The chevron takes the first stack with a creak, the second with a groan, the third with a sound like a baritone finding his note. Ice begins to pile where you told it to, at the deep bank, not at Front Street's ankles. A relief channel hums like a side street. Noah smiles for the first time since he read the notice at the recorder's door. Water is learning its manners, he says. For now, night arrives early and with a temper. The temperature drops like a verdict. Lanterns hang along the bend, their flames small and stubborn. Men's beards frost into models of ill-advised Victorian masonry. Your gloves stiffen between tasks. You keep moving so blood remembers. The apprentice, bare-cheeked and cocky, earns a line of frostbite on his right ear and a lecture from you he'll never resent. Harris moves among the crews like a conductor who learned timing from cave-ins. Faster here, slower there. Now everyone together. Hold the note just before midnight. The river tries to outsmart you. A pressure ridge bulges at the chevron's downstream tip, testing your angle with a knee you didn't plan for. You run out on the cribbing with 2 men roped to your belt and a load of brush tucked under your arm like a child. You lash a bundle across the ridge's face, then another, stitching the bulge to your intention. The ice decides to agree. You breathe again, then notice you still need to. Around 2, a crack snaps through the ice sheet like a whip. It races toward town, looking for a wall to punish. The chevron takes its energy and distributes it the way a good staircase handles a crowd-wide, generous, forgiving. The crack arrives at your build and forgets what it came to say. Dawn stains the east a thin pink. The chevron holds like a hymn. On sulfur, your fences bow under a load of silt, then shrugged, then hold again. The relief channel steams like a small miracle. Dawson timbers tense, and the dreams inside remains on the right side of the river's grammar. Men who never hug slapbacks until slaps become something else. The apprentice learns the futuristic art of breakfast with hands that won't unclaw from tools until noon. You walk the line cribs. Braces, brushpickers, inspection after victory is the difference between bragging and wisdom. Noah taps a post with his knuckles and smiles at its answer. Polite, he says. Back in town, the recorder posts the White Horse Wire, where everyone can stop calling the decision a rumor. The pioneer prints an extra town teaches River to wait. They spell your name correctly for the first time since you came north. The headline makes you itch and proud at the same time. You scratch both. In the afternoon, the San Francisco letter rests where you left it on, the bench between the bottle that burned, a yard and the willow that helped stop a flood. The draft for travel and a month's pay is still there, an insult only because it's generous. The apprentice brushes sawdust off the envelope with almost reverence. You going? He asks, finally daring the question everyone else treated like a skittish horse. I was, you say, and feel the past tense walk into the room. You think of the opera house banisters you could cradle into curves, the skylit shop where rain is background music, not policy, the kind of work your hands have earned. Then you think of a chevron crib in a grey river, of a brush fence built in one afternoon by a town that refuses to drown, of a code on your wall that turned craft into law. You think of a carver who taught you a word for stay, and a miner who taught you a word for not yet, asterisk. No, you answer, surprised by how quickly the second syllable becomes a plank you can step on. Not now. Not before the river learns spring with our fences still green. You write San Francisco a letter that a banker would call foolish and a carpenter would call true. You thank them for faith and gold. You tell them that you found a project larger than a lobbyist city made of wood and willand, that it would be wrong to abandon it before winter writes a grade. You put the draft back in the envelope and send it upriver to fund a ship, bringing glass and soplates and a new planer Dawson can't afford yet. You enclose a pencil rubbing of the code, because words on wood are sometimes better than letters on paper. White Horse sends a second wire 2 days later. This one drier and more powerful. Board's authority confirmed through Thor. experiments only with board consent, settling ponds if and when. First Nation seat required. Noah reads it aloud in the imperial lobby, his voice carrying not like a lawyer's but like weather and men who don't clap for law clap for the river, having a lawyer they trust. When the river finally locks flat, hard, honest, the chevron becomes part of town law. Children run out onto it with permission and learn the odd joy of standing on something you built to keep them from needing to swim in January. The relief channel turns to a skating ribbon. A fiddler plays on the bank and the notes skid across the ice like gossip. Harris takes you out to the stove chamber on a Sunday. Straight as Uplau noon. The cap you relieved hums a lower note now, satisfied that you listened. He rests a hand on the post you sistered and nods once. Hold, he tells the wood, as if it needs his blessing to keep doing what it wants. He clears his throat like rocks in a bucket. I got word from a cousin on Dominion says, a side string we ignored is showing color. Not a king's ransom, but it will by the soplets you just promised away. Good, you say, and mean it without envy. By nails too. Winter eats them. Mrs. Wilkes throws a Christmas that tastes like rescue. The boarding house table groans under tins that somehow found fruit inside them, and a roast that may have walked into the pan of its own accord. Someone smuggles in an orange, which circulates around the table like treasure. You raise a cup to absent friends. Billy, who writes now of afternoons that are gentle instead of survival. Your father, who taught you to string a straight line and to keep your promises to wood. Even Hiram Vance, who will spend this winter making rope in a place where rope has different meanings. Mercy, like nails, is a town's hidden currency. On New Year's, the Imperial hangs lanterns, and the carver stands in the lobby, studying the salmon bony border you made together. You built this to tell people they're home when they walk in from cold, he says. That is better than gold. He pulls from his pocket a small chip of jade, soft green as a promise, scratched with a word your tongue still learns. For your door, he says. So you remember to come back to it, and you do build that door your own. Finally, a tour-room cabin up second where the wind has to introduce itself before it enters. The apprentice helps set the sill, his hammer sure, his ear healed and only a little pink when the cold bites. The fin planes, the jam true, cursing in a language that loves consonants. Harris bores the mortise for the lock because he enjoys the metaphor. Noah hangs a bundle of dried willow by the lintel and tells the house the same word he told the river. Stay, you. Write Margaret a longer letter than you intended. You tell her you didn't come home yet because you found one here temporary, hard, honest. You tell her that you keep father's compass in your pocket and that it spins toward work more reliably than north these days. You enclose the pioneer clipping and a sketch of the chevron, just lines and angles and a note in the margin. A staircase we built for ice. When the sun swings back in February and decides to linger instead of peaking, the river starts to squirm under its white shirt. Men take bets on the minute of breakup like they always will, but this time fewer faces look scared and more look ready. The brush fences hold as snowmelt begins its education. The chevron releases its ice in polite chunks that go where you told them, not where they'd like to make history. Billy's first spring letter arrives, with a photo of a bank counter that shines like it was waxed by a man who learned patience from winter. I did not become rich, he writes, but I became steady. That feels like a better fortune. He asks whether your opera house needs a treasurer. You smile and pin it over the bench where you mark graduations in a pencil that smells like hope One afternoon, late spring now, you find a quiet hour in the Imperial and lay your palm on the banister that started as a sketch and became a sentence entire families read with their hands every night. You feel the small dents where rings kissed wood a little too hard, and the soft ridge where a child jumped one stair too many and learned balance. You think of that first night in Seattle when a headline slapped a floorboard and a landlord slapped your pride. You think of the golden stairs and the golden lies and the golden things that turned out to be pine and yet worth more when joined well. When people ask, as they will in a town that collects stories like taxes, what the Klondike taught you about surviving the deadliest trail in history. You don't talk first about luck or lungs or sleds or ore. You talk about design of cap sets that share loads of fences that slow a river without insulting it, of codes pounded into boards so green men can read them. You talk about alliances, how a carver and a carpenter and a miner and a storekeeper and a widow and a Mountie built a weir in a day because tomorrow wouldn't wait. You talk about attention, the kind that measures a creak, the way a doctor reads a pulse. And you talk about enough the strange, rich word that tells a man when to stop digging a hole or an argument. Gold bought whiskey and windows and, sometimes, funerals. But craft a staircase that doesn't squeal, a cap that doesn't fail. A river that hesitates long enough to let a town breathe bought something else. It bought time. It bought sleep. And that's what I want for you, friend drifting off with us across states and rooftops and the quiet hum of phones on nightstands. To feel the weight of blankets like weirs holding back the day. To hear your breath come easy like a river taught to wait. To know that long after the nuggets are spent, the things we build for one another are the riches that don't run out. Close your eyes. Somewhere far north, a chevron holds, a stove hums low, and a door with a jade chip above it clicks shut against the cold. The town sleeps. You can too. How gold rushers survived the deadliest trail in history, Klondike Gold Rush. Asterisk.